Okay, so I wasn't planning on releasing this episode on YouTube, because YouTube doesn't like these kinds of, episodes. But it's been very well received by premium members, and on the podcast side of things. So here it is, and viewer discretion is heavily advised. We need your help to keep Tales from the Break Room and all of EerieCast alive. Go to Eerie.fm, that's EERIE.fm, and sign up to be a premium member. As a member, you'll never have to listen to another ad on any EerieCast show. You'll unlock dozens of hours of exclusive audiobooks, including one narrated by me. You'll get exclusive shows and bonus stories you can't hear anywhere else, and more. Only $8 a month, or $70 a year. That's all we need to keep the horror alive. Thank you. That's Eerie.fm.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
I need to be clear with you about the following story. This is not your usual scary story. This one is well written, darkly realistic, and very, very devastating. If you have trouble dealing with subject matter regarding harm against kids, then this one might not be for you. It's not graphic at all, my stories never really are, but this one will make you feel dirty, and it will leave you wanting to cry. The story is titled, Everything I Never Knew, from E.J. Walkins. My sister disappeared from a dairy plant in October of 2003, when I was 9 years old. The county still has the case open. Her name was Delilah. She was 8, almost 9 years old, and I was a year older. She had a stuffed otter named Bean that came with her everywhere, and a small white scar on her chin from a porch step she'd fallen off of when she was 4. There was this thing she did where she would go really still right before she cried, like she was holding a breath she knew would set her off if she let it out. I remember the day it happened. My mom had flown to Ohio because her mother had died, and the funeral was Saturday afternoon. Dad was supposed to take care of us for the weekend. He was foreman of the cheese line at the dairy plant and had been there 12 years by then. Most days he left before we were awake. The phone in the kitchen rang at 5:08 that morning. I was already awake by then. Delilah had crawled into my bed sometime in the night with Bean tucked under her arm, and I'd been lying there pretending to sleep, so I wouldn't have to roll over and give her more room. I heard Dad answer in the kitchen, mumbling something into the receiver. Then he walked into the hallway. After a minute, he said, "No, I'll come," twice in the same low voice. He came into my room a few minutes later, in his jeans and a flannel shirt. He stood in the doorway for a long second, looking at the two of us in bed. I had my eyes just barely open, so he couldn't tell I was awake, but I could see him there. When he turned on the lamp, Delilah blinked and made a small sound, pulling Bean closer. "Kids. Hey, Eli, wake up, bud." I opened my eyes and pretended I was just waking up. "Something's going on at work. I've got to go in for an hour, maybe 2. Gonna take you guys with me." "Why can't we stay here?" "I tried Mrs. Adler. She's not picking up. And I'm not leaving you two alone here." Delilah sat up and pushed her hair off her face. She told him her stomach hurt. He sat on the edge of the bed and put his hand to her forehead. Whatever he was feeling for, he didn't find it. "You're not warm. You probably need to eat something. Come on." "I don't want to go." "Deli, it's gonna be 1 hour. You can watch cartoons. Nobody's there. I have to check on a tank, and I have to do it now." She looked at me. I shrugged. I was 9, and to me the dairy plant was interesting. We'd only been there once before, and I'd liked it. She held Bean close and got out of the bed, walking down the hall to her room without another word. In the kitchen, Dad poured cereal into 2 bowls and set them on the counter without milk. He was wearing his work boots by then, untied, so the laces ticked on the linoleum when he moved. Delilah came back in a sweatshirt over her pajamas, holding Bean by 1 foot. She climbed onto a stool, ate maybe 4 bites, and pushed the bowl away. "My stomach hurts." "You'll feel better when we get there. I'll bring you crackers," my dad said. He was on the phone and he wasn't really looking at her when he said it, though. The drive was 26 minutes. The fields outside were silver with frost, and the sky was a deep before-dawn navy. Delilah was in the back seat with Bean on her lap and her cheek against the window.
Daddy?
Yeah, honey.
I don't want to go in.
Deli, we talked about this.
My stomach hurts so bad.
You can lay down on the couch in the break room. I'll bring you some ginger ale. She watched the field instead of answering. The plant was on a county road off Route 30, all the way behind a chain-link fence and a sliding gate. Dad had a key for the pedestrian gate and a different one for the side door near the loading dock. The main building was long and low, with the words Hagner Valley Dairy stenciled in faded green above the loading bay. No other cars were in the employee lot. He pulled around to a spot by the side door and killed the engine. The silence that came after made me realize how loud the heater had been. I undid my seatbelt. Delilah stayed put. Deli?
I don't want to go in.
Delilah Marie, come on, honey.
He's in there.
I remember that moment. I recall thinking I didn't know what she meant at the time, and I didn't ask. Dad sighed and twisted around in his seat to face her. Who's in there, baby?
The Shadow Man.
He looked at me, and once more I shrugged. I didn't know what to do with that information either. He turned back to her, and his voice softened. Del, there's nobody in there. I checked the cameras before we left the house. Just me, you, and Eli. I promise. I could tell she was trying not to cry. I told her it was fine. Bean came inside with us. The side door opened into a vestibule with a shoe-cleaning grate and a wall of clipboards. Dad punched a code into the inner door and held it open for us. The hallway beyond had the smell I remembered from a Christmas open house we'd been to when I was 6. It's hard to describe if you've never been to the dairy plant. Kind of like bleach, I guess, with that undertone of milk. He walked us down to the break room and turned on the lights as he went. Those fluorescent tube lights woke up 2 at a time, with soft electric popping sounds. The break room had a folding table, a microwave, a vending machine, and a small TV bolted to a high shelf in the corner. The couch against the wall had clearly been somebody's living room couch before it got donated to work. Dad turned the TV on, flipping through to Cartoon Network, and handed me the remote. Right, so the phone here goes to my office, numbers taped on the wall right there. If you guys need me, you pick it up and dial that. Don't go anywhere. Delilah, are you listening?
Yeah.
You stay in this room. Don't touch the microwave or open the back door, and don't go anywhere near the production area. I'll be back in an hour, maybe a little more.
Okay.
Eli, watch your sister, you hear me?
I hear you, Dad.
He looked at her one more time. She was sitting on the couch with Bean on her lap and her shoes still on. He started to say something else, then he changed his mind, and he kissed the top of her head, telling her he loved her and that he'd be back soon. The sound of his boots faded as he went down the hallway. After that, I could only hear the TV and some refrigerator in the distance. Somewhere deeper in the building, a steady sort of pulse. Delilah scooted closer to me on the couch. She'd pulled Bean up against her chest with both hands tied around him. We sat there. The cartoons played. Eventually, the clock on the wall said it had only been 35 minutes. I'd lost interest in the show somewhere around the second commercial break. Delilah hadn't moved from her spot, and Bean had taken up his position against her sternum. I'm gonna go look around.
Eli?
I'm just gonna go look. Dad's not gonna care. We came here that one time and he showed us the tanks, remember?
But he said don't leave.
He said don't go to the production area. The break room is right by the offices. I'll just look at the offices. She didn't say anything after that. I stood up. The TV was loud now that I was paying attention to how loud it was. I told her I'd be 10 minutes. She went still again, meaning she was about to cry. So I sat back down.
Okay, I won't go without you. Come with me.
I don't wanna. Deli, there's nobody here, Dad said. He said he looked at the cameras. She kept her face turned to the TV.
What did you mean by Shadow Man?
She looked at me sideways without turning her head.
He's here. He stays in the corners. I don't see anything. He doesn't want you to see him.
Bean was getting squeezed so tight, his head was at an angle. She's 8 years old, I thought. She's making it up because she's scared and doesn't want to be here.
You said you've seen him before?
Where?
The other time we came. He was up on the walkway.
He didn't say anything then.
I told Mommy.
What did Mom say?
She said it was a regular man.
That seemed strange. I think now my mother probably said something else, and Delilah translated it through her own head. But at the time, her response sat in my chest and didn't move from there. I told her I wouldn't leave her, and she could come with me, and if she saw him, she could tell me and we'd come right back. She thought about it. Then she got off the couch and put her hand in my hand. Bean came along by his foot. The hallway outside the break room ran in 2 directions. To the left was the way Dad had brought us in. To the right was a long beige corridor with linoleum tile and a strip of black rubber baseboard lit by the overhead lights that Dad had switched on as he walked us down it. None of the doors had names on them, just laminated sheets and plastic frames with what looked like codes written on them. 2 doors I tried were locked. The third was a supply closet that smelled like bleach. Delilah pulled at my hand and I closed it. The corridor opened on the right into a wider space that I now know was the shipping office. There were 2 desks with old desktop computers and a corkboard layered with paper schedules. Somebody's mug was on one of the desks with a brown ring inside it from old coffee. The mug had a cartoon cow on it, and it said, "Got milk?" We went on. The corridor T-intersected at the end. The left end had a heavier door with a small wire glass window and a hand-lettered sign that said, "Production, keep closed." The handle there didn't turn. I went back to the T and turned right. Delilah came with me, but slower now, looking back the way we'd come. I had to tug her hand a little to keep her with me. At the end of that hallway was a stairwell with a yellow railing and a doorway that opened onto a metal catwalk. The catwalk ran out over the production floor, 10 feet up, and from the top of the stairs, you could see the whole room through it. Stainless steel tanks tall enough to take up 2 stories, with pipes connecting them and small valve handles painted red and blue. Below the tanks, the floor was open to drains and washed in pale gray light from the high windows. This was the part I'd liked the first time we'd come. I let go of her hand without thinking and walked out onto the catwalk to look down. The grating made a different sound than the linoleum had under my shoes. Behind me, I heard her say my name.
Eli?
Look, it's huge.
Eli, come back.
I turned. She was at the doorway with both hands on the frame, not stepping out onto the catwalk.
It's safe. There's a railing here. I want to go back.
1 second. I leaned my forehead on the rail and looked straight down. The hum I'd been hearing in the break room was louder out here, low and steady, and I could feel it in the metal under my hands. When I turned back toward her, her face was pointed up and to the right, past me, at the far end of the catwalk, where it disappeared around the side of a tank. Her mouth was open. She was doing the still thing again. I looked where she was looking. The catwalk turned out of sight behind the tank, but I didn't see anything out of the ordinary.
What is it?
She didn't answer me. I walked back to her and took her hand again, and her hand was cold.
Deli, what did you see? He's down there now.
I told her there was nobody, and I pulled her back through the doorway into the stairwell. We came out at the bottom into a corridor I hadn't seen on our first visit. The walls were 2 big stainless tanks set side by side, with a 5-foot gap between them. The gap ran maybe 60 feet and ended at another door. The tank walls were polished bright enough that you could see your own outline in them, blurred and stretched in the curve of the steel. Delilah stopped at the entrance.
I don't want to go that way.
It's just a hallway, I replied.
He's at the end of it.
There's nobody at the end. Look, I'll show you. I walked into the gap. The reflections of me on either side walked with me, 2 pale ghosts at my elbows, faces smeared. I could see Delilah behind me in the curve of the steel, hand still on the doorframe with Bean dangling. As I went farther down, she got smaller. The humming sound was stronger here, with a higher note in it under the bass. I got to the door at the end, and I tried the handle. It was locked. I turned around to walk back. The reflections walked with me again, and that was when I saw that one of those reflections was not mine. It was farther down the curve of the left-hand tank, behind my reflection, taller than my reflection, and it was a person shape that was the wrong proportions, narrow at the shoulders and long down the middle, blurred along edges that didn't match the edges on me. I stopped walking. The reflection stopped walking. I blinked hard. When I opened my eyes, the reflection was just my reflection, and Delilah's small reflection at the doorway behind me. Beyond that, just the curve of the tank. I made myself walk back at a normal speed. When I got to her, she was looking at me with the same face she had whenever Mom was about to tell us something serious. "You saw?" "I didn't see anything, I told you. There's nobody there." "You saw." "Deli, I didn't. Come on." She put a small hand on my shirt, on my chest, and she said, "Please don't leave me here." "I won't." We walked back to the break room together without going by the shipping office or the stairwell. She climbed onto the couch and pulled her knees up, holding Bean to her face. The TV was still on. Cartoons had moved to a different show. I sat next to her. After what I saw with the reflections, my heart had sped up a bit. The clock on the wall said 7:42 when we sat down. The next time I looked up, 8:11. "Del, I'm thirsty." "There's water." "I want a Capri Sun. Dad said there was a vending machine in the office hallway." "I don't want to go." "You can stay. I'll go and come back real quick. I won't go anywhere else." "You said you wouldn't leave me." "I'm not leaving. I'm just going to the vending machine. It's right there." She went quiet. Then she lay down on the couch and turned her face into the back cushion. Bean was tucked between her chin and her chest. I told her I'd bring her one too, but she didn't say anything. The vending machine took dollar bills and quarters. I'd brought 4 quarters from the cup of change on Dad's dresser. It didn't have Capri Sun, but it did have bug juice, so I bought one for me and one for Delilah. I carried them under my arm. Dad's office was at the other end of the hallway. I told myself I would just look inside real quick and see if he was there. I wanted to ask if we could go home already. I didn't say to myself the second part, which was that I wanted to tell him that Delilah was still talking about the Shadow Man. But his office was empty. The light was on, which I thought was weird. His coat was over the back of the chair. There was a clipboard on the desk and a coffee cup next to it, and the coffee cup was empty. The chair was pushed out from the desk like he had just stood up. I called for him quietly, though I wasn't sure if I wanted to be heard for some reason. I didn't get an answer. I walked back down the office hallway toward the break room with the 2 bug juices under my arm. It must have been 10 minutes, maybe 12 at most. I was 9 years old and wasn't wearing a watch at the time. When I got to the break room, the TV was on, but the couch was empty, except for Bean. Bean was still on the couch. Delilah's juice box from breakfast was tipped onto its side on the table. A small amount of apple juice had run out onto the laminate. The straw was still in it. I called her name. "Delilah?" Nothing. I said it again louder. The bathroom in the corner of the break room was empty. I called into the office hallway, then up the stairwell, where the catwalk doorway echoed her name back at me. "Delilah!" I then tried the production door, but the handle didn't turn. I went down a hallway I hadn't been down with her, past doors that said Cold Storage 2 or 3, through a heavy plastic flap curtain that closed behind me with a soft slap. The room past the flap was warmer than the rest of the building. There were tanks in there too, but smaller ones, and a workbench with a panel of gauges and a wrench laying on top of an open clipboard. "Delilah?" "Eli?" His voice came from a doorway at the back of the room. I went to it. The doorway opened onto a smaller space with a single tank in it, a white tiled wall and a grated drain in the floor. Dad was standing at a utility sink at the far wall, with his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, drying his forearms with a blue paper towel. Water was beaded on the front of his shirt, where his apron had been. The apron was on a hook by the door. "Eli, what are you doing back here?" You shouldn't be in this room."
Delilah's gone.
"What?"
She's not in the break room. She's gone.
He stopped drying his hands. The paper towel was in a wad in his fist. He looked at me, and I had never seen his face do what it did then. It was like watching a man who had been wearing a costume realize that his costume was on backwards. He dropped the paper towel on the floor. "What do you mean she's gone?"
I went to the vending machine and I came back and she wasn't there.
"How long ago, Eli?"
I don't know.
"Eli, how long?"
I don't know, Dad. 10 minutes, maybe more.
He pushed past me through the flap curtain. I followed him. We searched the plant for an hour. Then we called 911. By the time the first deputy arrived, I had told my dad 3 more times where I'd been, how long I'd been gone, and each time he asked me for a number of minutes, I gave him a different answer, because I was a kid, and I was panicked. He kept his voice level, never really raising it. The deputies cleared the building. Then a county sergeant came in, along with a search and rescue unit with 2 dogs. Somebody got a hold of my mother in Ohio. By the time she made it home, it was after dark, and there were 6 cruisers in the dairy parking lot and a news van out at the gate. The side door near the loading dock had been propped open with a folded square of cardboard. Nobody could say when. Dad said he had brought us through that door, but he had let it close behind us. The deputies took photos of that cardboard. The dogs went out across the field behind the plant, but lost track of anything at the ditch. The county's theory after the first week was that a stranger had abducted her, someone who had known the plant was empty on Saturdays, and yet knew we would be there. Sometime in the next year, it became an abduction by someone who had been watching the family for a while. And after that, it stopped being any specific theory, and just became the case file with my sister's name on it, and her 2nd grade school photo paper-clipped to the inside. A woman from the FBI asked me to draw the plant on a piece of printer paper. I drew her the catwalk and the corridor between the 2 tanks, and the room in the back where I'd found my dad. I told her about the shape and the reflection, and she wrote it down. Our living room at that point smelled permanently like casseroles, from all the people we didn't know sending them to us for support. My mother sat at the kitchen table at 3 a.m. with all the lights off. Bean was on the kitchen counter in a clear plastic evidence bag. 3 days after, in the same flannel he had worn that morning, my dad sat in the front yard at sundown until it was fully dark. My mother got the diagnosis when I was 17. She lived another 19 months. By the end, she could not say Delilah's name anymore without coming apart, so she found ways to talk around it, and we all learned to use the same language. My father stopped saying it earlier than that, sometime that first year. I don't remember him saying her name again. I grew up. I went to college in state and moved out for good after my mother's funeral. I got a job in HVAC. I called my dad on Sundays, but we never talked about much. The thing that started it was a planner. 2 summers ago, my dad sold the house I grew up in, moving into a smaller place on the other side of the county. The basement had been a slow accumulation of everything none of us had been able to throw away after my mother died. He needed some help clearing it out, and I was the only one left to help him. He took the garage and I took the basement. He said he couldn't go down there for more than 10 minutes at a time without his back giving out. The basement had been my mother's territory. Her sewing machine and boxes of fabric were down there, along with plastic bins of Christmas ornaments she'd labeled, in her famously round handwriting, on masking tape strips that had yellowed and curled at the edges. I was going through a stack of bins along the south wall when I found the box of her planners. She had used the same brand of black hardcover daily planner from the year she got married until the year she got sick. There were 23 of them, banded together in 5s with rubber bands that broke when I touched them. I sat on the basement floor and went through them one at a time. I couldn't help it. Most of the entries were grocery lists, dentist appointments, or my soccer schedule, or Delilah's piano lessons. I found the 2003 planner near the bottom of the stack. I almost didn't open it. I sat with it on my lap for a while. When I finally did open it, I went straight to October. Then I made myself close it and started January instead. I read from there. I thought if I went straight to the month it happened, I would skip past whatever else was in there, and I didn't want to do that, even though it was a bit tempting. But I found something on a Wednesday in mid-September, 2.5 weeks before that day. The entry was 3 lines. Most of it was about a plumber. But the line in the middle said, "Mr. A called from school today regarding D. Talk to John tonight." The D had been written first, then a name on top of it that had been started and crossed out before I could read it. The exclamation marks were my mother's. She underlined the "tonight" twice. Upstairs, I could hear my dad walking from the kitchen to the garage. He had developed a slow shuffle over the last few years. I knew Mr. A. His name was David Allen. He had been the school counselor at the elementary school I went to from kindergarten through 5th grade, the same school Delilah went to from kindergarten through 2nd. I had seen him once in 4th grade, after a kid in my class had said something about my sister, and I broke the kid's tooth. Mr. Allen had been a soft-spoken man with a beard. I remembered him saying that what had happened to my family was not my fault, and I'd nodded and said, "Yes, sir," and the meeting ended. I closed the planner, and I put it back in the bin. Then I put that bin in the pile of things to keep. I didn't say anything to my dad about it that day or the next. I drove home that night with the planner in the passenger seat under a folded sweatshirt, and honestly, I wasn't sure why I took it. A couple days later, I called the elementary school. Crazy, but the receptionist actually remembered me, which I had not been counting on. She said Mr. Allen had retired in 2015, but she could get me his email. I said thanks. I wrote him a short message that night and left it open on my laptop for 2 days before finally sending it. I told him I was Delilah's brother, that I was trying to fill in some things from back then, and I was wondering if he would be willing to talk to me. He wrote back the next morning, saying yes. He asked if I would come to his house. He couldn't drive at night anymore. His house was a brick rancher with a wheelchair ramp by the front door. He met me in the doorway. He had me sit at his kitchen table and made coffee, and he waited to ask me any questions until after the coffee was poured. Mr. Allen," I said. "David," he corrected me. David, I found something in my mom's planner. It says you called her about Delilah 3 weeks before she went missing." He sat across from me with both hands around his mug. "I remember the call," he said. "Can you tell me what it was about?" "I was a counselor for 31 years, and I had 2 cases I've not been able to make peace with. Your sister's was the first. I called your mother because Delilah's teacher had come to me with a concern. Your sister had drawn this picture of her family during a quiet activity. There were things in the picture that were, well, unusual. I'll leave it at that. I called your mother and told her I'd like to set up a meeting with both of your parents. She was very upset on the phone. She asked me not to call your father. She said she would talk to him herself, and she would call me back the next day." "Did she ever call you back?" "She left me a voicemail at the school 3 days later. She said she had spoken to your father, and that picture had been a misunderstanding. She said there was a relative in the family who had had problems with alcohol, and that Delilah had been around it. She thanked me and asked not to follow up." "What happened after?" "Well, I waited a week. I went to Delilah's classroom on a Friday and spent 15 minutes drawing with her at her desk, while the rest of the class did silent reading. I asked her if she was happy at home. She said yes. I asked if anything was scaring her, and she said yes. She said a man was in the corners sometimes. I thought she was describing an imaginary friend. I asked her if it was a real man, and she said no. I thought about it through the weekend, and on Monday morning I picked up the phone to call your mother again. That was the morning I heard about the dairy plant." "Eli, I want to say one more thing. I've run that conversation with your mother through my head every week for 21 years. I should have called your father. I should have called CPS. I did neither. I told myself at the time that there was a process and that nobody had told me anything that crossed the threshold for a report. That was true. It was also a way of letting myself off the hook. I'm old enough now to know the difference, and I wanted you to hear me say it. I stayed and talked for another 15 minutes, but nothing really was said. I mean, nothing more important than what was already said. Before I left, he said that he was sorry. I believed him, but I didn't have anything against him. A friend of mine from college works at a regional engineering firm that does plant maintenance contracts for several of the dairies in the state. His father had worked in the plant when my dad did. I decided to call him up on a Thursday, asking him a favor I knew he probably couldn't do. I asked if he could pull the maintenance logs from the plant for the week when that event happened. I told him why. He called me back the next Tuesday. I was expecting him to tell me that he wasn't able to do it. We met up for a beer on Wednesday at a place near his office, and he had a manila folder. This is from a backup the new owners imported when they bought the assets. It's not a chain of custody document. You can't take it to anybody, okay? I know. Thank you, man, thank you. I'm only giving it to you because I think it's the right thing to do. I'm not gonna make you regret it, I swear. He slid the folder across the table. It had 18 pages in it, most of them unremarkable cleaning logs and vendor visits. I went through them at the bar with him sitting across from me. He watched me while I read. The Friday night entry was on page 11, the day before my sister's disappearance. The badge log showed my father had clocked in at 9:47 p.m. and clocked out at 2:13 a.m., about 4.5 hours. The work order line said, concrete patch, basement utility room, facility maintenance, JFK. JFK was my father's initials. Yes, like the president. My friend pointed out two problems with that line. The badge log showed only my father's entry for the whole night, with no companion work order, and patches like that were nearly always two-person jobs. The dairy plant didn't have a basement utility room. He had pulled the floor plan to check, just in case. There was a utility crawl space under the production wing, accessible by a hatch in the washdown area, but it wasn't called a utility room, and it wasn't somewhere you would patch concrete on a Friday night. The Saturday entry was on page 15. The badge log showed my father in at 5:46 a.m. and out at 7:11 p.m. The work order line said facility check, tank 3 cold storage, JFK. The line below it said, no service ticket generated, see facility log. That facility log was page 16. There was no entry for that morning. The page jumped from Friday's evening shift to Sunday morning's incoming run. My friend watched me close the folder. Eli? I know. As I said, you can't take this to anyone. Not even the cops with this paperwork. You understand that? Yeah, I understand. I left after thanking him again, and without touching my beer. That fall, my dad and I went out for dinner a few times. The first time was at his place. He made some spaghetti, which is what he made almost every time we ate at his place. We talked about the Steelers and a leak he had in his bathroom ceiling. He hugged me longer than usual at the door. I could tell he was starting to feel lonely. The second time we went out that fall was at a chain restaurant on the highway. He had a beer with his meal and made a joke about getting old. He told me a story I'd heard before, about a coworker who had dropped a wrench into a tank during a cleaning cycle and had to fish it out on a wire hanger. He laughed at the part where the coworker swore in front of the plant manager. I laughed too, like I always did. Then I asked him about the fall. That fall. I tried to make it sound natural in the conversation. I said I'd been doing some thinking lately, trying to put pieces together for myself. I wanted to ask him a few things if he didn't mind. He set his beer down and looked at me. I couldn't tell what that look even meant. What do you want to know? That Friday night, you were at the plant late. How do you know that? I was looking through Mom's planner. She didn't keep track of when I was at work, Eli. It was something else. It doesn't matter. I just remembered. He tinkered with his spaghetti with his fork. I worked late a lot. You know that. I do know that. Do you have something to ask me, son? Did something happen that week? What do you mean, did something happen that week? I don't know. I'm just asking. Eli, I don't know why we're talking about this. He drank his beer and began to watch the TV over the bar. I changed the subject. He paid for dinner and walked me to my car, hugging me and telling me to drive safe. The third dinner was back at his place 2 weeks later. Spaghetti, of course, and we didn't talk about any of it. He fell asleep in his recliner during a college football game. I sat there and watched him sleep before I went home. There was one more thing I did. Delilah had a friend in second grade named Amber Peltier, the only real friend I remember her having outside our family. After the Saturday, her parents pulled her out of the school. We never saw her again. I found her on Facebook. Her last name was different now, and she was a teacher at an elementary school 2 counties over. Her profile picture was her with 2 kids on her lap on a porch. I sent her a message telling her who I was, asking if she'd be able to talk to me. She wrote back within an hour. She asked if I could come to her house that weekend. I brought some sunflowers. She met me at the door and put them in a vase at the kitchen sink, while her husband took the kids to the park to give us the house. We sat in her living room. There was a candle burning on the coffee table that smelled like apples. You know, I've been wanting to talk to somebody about this for 2 decades. I've never really known who to talk to, so I'm glad you're here, she explained. I'd say it's good to be here, if you know what I mean, but thank you for having me. She told me, I want you to understand that I'm telling you what an 8-year-old told me when I was 8, okay? I don't know what's true versus what she made up to deal with something else. I'm just gonna tell you what she told me. I nodded. We had a sleepover, just the one time. I don't know if you remember that, but we were playing Truth or Dare together in my room. She took every dare instead of a single truth. But you know kids that age, especially the anxious ones. Dares are scary, so it's always truth this and truth that. But not her. So I dared her to tell me a truth. And she started to cry. I thought I'd done something wrong, that I said something I shouldn't have. I remember that night, I replied. She was so scared yet excited to have her first real sleepover. It was a quiet night back at home for me. I recall feeling proud of her for being brave about it. But yeah, that sounds like Deli. She had always been very difficult about opening up. Did she say anything afterward? Amber herself looked like she might cry. She cleared her throat then and said, I'm so sorry, Eli. I'm telling you this because you need to hear it. So please don't think that I'm trying to start a family feud or hurt you. This is something I never even told the cops. God, I'm so sorry. I swallowed. It's okay. Please tell me. Your sister, Delilah, she said that every time she was around her father, her stomach would start to hurt, and that she never knew why. I asked her if he had ever hurt her, and she said that her father was the nicest man but could be scary. He watched her from corners, she said, and sometimes he would follow her to her room when no one else was around. When I asked why he would do that, she cried so hard she couldn't speak. I held her and rocked her and got her to calm down, but I did everything I could to keep the topic away from her home and her father for the rest of the night. My eyes filled with water, and I held both hands cupped in front of my mouth, elbows on my knees. I didn't know I'd been staring at the floor the entire time until I finally blinked, causing some tears to come loose. I wiped my face and stuttered. Thank you, Amber. I need to go. I'm so sorry, Eli. I should have told someone. I was so young and scared, and I didn't know what any of it meant at the time. I walked out, and I just drove. Around the start of November, I went out to the plant for the first time in 21 years. I didn't go in. I sat in my car across from the chain-link fence and just looked at that building. The plant had closed back in 2019 when Hagner Valley sold to a national co-op that consolidated the operation into a larger facility 40 miles away. The Hagner Valley Dairy stencil had faded to where you couldn't read it anymore, but I knew it was there. The lot had weeds in the cracks of the asphalt and a for sale sign by the gate. I must have sat there for nearly an hour. The light was going. A second-floor window at the south end of the building was a weak yellow square, and I hoped it was just the setting sun catching the glass at an angle. When I drove past it the second time on my way home, the light was gone, and I made myself stop trying to figure out whether it had been anything. I called the listing agent 2 days later. His name was Brian Conroy, and I'd apparently played intramural soccer with him in college. Truth be told, I didn't remember him. I told him I was thinking about getting into commercial real estate as a hobby, and I wanted to walk a vacant industrial property to learn what to look for. He laughed and said the dairy was a perfect place to learn because every system in it was 40 years old. He said he would meet me there one day. But instead I asked if I could just take the keys for an afternoon and bring them back. I could hear him shaking his head over the phone. He said he wasn't supposed to do that. I explained my situation as best I could, that I really wanted to get a feel of the place by myself, that whenever people showed me properties, I never got the right feel, that it felt like I was being rushed or pressured, and I always walked away feeling like I never really saw everything I wanted to see. I played up the "I've got money now" angle, and eventually he relented. He said that he trusted me, having known me back in college, which is miraculous considering, again, I didn't remember him. Beyond his name, I mean. He said he would leave the keys in a lockbox on the gate, and he would text me the code, and he would have to change it the next morning. But he said, "Don't get hurt, and don't let anyone see me go in." I thanked him profusely. The day before I went, I sat at the kitchen table in my apartment and drank a beer. I looked at the code that Brian had texted me for the lockbox, like I was afraid I would forget it or accidentally delete it. Around 11, I decided to call my dad. He picked up on the second ring.
Hey, son.
"Hey, Dad. Just checking in."
You alright? You sound stressed.
"Yeah, it's been a long week for me. How's your back?"
Same as it's been. You sound tired.
"I am tired."
Then get some sleep.
We were quiet for a few seconds, and eventually I said, "Dad?"
Yeah, son.
Nothing. I love you, Dad."
Love you too, son.
I hung up, and I made myself go to bed. I drove out there a little past noon. The sky was gray, but the forecast did not call for any rain or sun, just gray. The county road was empty. I parked on the shoulder again across from the gate, and I walked over to the drop box. I typed the code, scared it wouldn't work. But it opened on the first try. The 3 keys on a brass ring inside had handwritten labels that read, "Side, Office, General." The gate squealed when I pushed it. The chain had been wound through a fence post instead of the gate itself, which meant the gate had been swinging on its hinges for God knows how long. I walked the lot to the side door by the loading dock. The lock turned slowly, and I pushed the door open, standing in the vestibule with the cold air from inside meeting me at the chest. The smell when I went in was nothing like I remembered. That bleachiness was gone, and the milk ghost under it was gone too. What was there instead was the smell of old building that had not been heated in 5 winters at least. It had the stench of cold concrete and dust, a thread of mildew there too, so moisture was probably getting in somewhere. I propped the side door open behind me with a folded square of cardboard. The office hallway looked the same, but the fluorescent tubes were now gone from half the fixtures, and the plastic frames on the doors were empty where the laminated codes had been. The shipping office had been stripped except for the built-in desks. The mug with the cartoon cow was not on the desk anymore, but it was a mug, so I'm not really sure what I was expecting. I went down to the break room, my stomach getting heavy and painful. In the break room, the bracket where the TV had been was still on the wall, but everything else had been hauled out. The folding table had been left behind, leaned against the back wall with its legs folded. I stood in the doorway, but I did not go in. I'd been in this room enough. I went on. The corridor that had T intersected at the production door was the same corridor. The "Production Keep Closed" sign had been pulled down at some point, leaving a ghost in the paint where it had been taped. The vestibule beyond the door was empty. The stainless wall the washdown station had been mounted to had been pulled off, and the bracket holes were ringed with black where the silicone caulk had stained the surrounding metal. I walked through into the production room. I had to stop, because the room was not the room I'd walked into when I was 9. The tanks were gone, all of them. The catwalk was still up there, 10 feet over the floor, but it ran across an empty space now. Where the tanks had stood, there were rings of bolts set into the concrete and a few feet of pipe stub poking up where the cold lines had been cut. The drains were still in the floor, but the hum I'd felt under my hands on the catwalk railing was gone. I stood in the middle of the empty room. I'd been carrying that room around in my head for 2/3 of my life, and somebody had come through 5 years ago, unbolting it, selling it for scrap. The corridor I'd walked down between the two tanks, the one with the reflections, was gone. Where it had been, there was just floor. I made myself keep moving. The office key opened my father's old office. The door was no longer locked, but the key worked, which surprised me a little. The office had been emptied like the rest of the building. The desk was still there. After all, it had been built into the wall, a slab of laminate over a frame of 2x4s. The drawers were still in the desk. There were 3 on the right side, stacked. I sat in the empty office for a minute. Then I started with the top drawer. The top drawer was empty. The middle drawer was empty except for a single rubber band and a paperclip. The bottom drawer was the deepest of the 3, and it was empty too. But I'd read enough crime novels and watched enough movies in my life to know what to do with an empty, deep drawer. I pulled it out of the desk frame and turned it over. When I saw it, I couldn't breathe. You have to understand that I did not expect to find anything right there. But there was a manila envelope taped to the underside of the drawer. The tape was yellow and brittle, and it came off in pieces when I pulled the envelope free. I sat on the floor of my father's office with the drawer in my lap and the envelope in my hand. The envelope was unlabeled. It had been folded twice to fit under the drawer. When I unfolded it, I could feel by the weight that whatever was inside was paper, and not very much paper. So I knew it wasn't maintenance logs or photographs. It had to be something else. I opened the envelope, my heart pounding. Inside was a single folded sheet of construction paper. The paper was orange, soft along the creases from being folded for a long time. I unfolded it on the floor in front of me. It was a drawing made clearly by Delilah. I knew her crayon the second I saw it. She had drawn 5 figures in a row across the page in her crayon shorthand. The first was a woman in a triangle dress with yellow hair. Over it she had written, "Mommy," in pink. The second was a boy with a cowlick she had given me on the front of every picture she had ever drawn of me. And over it she had written, "Eli," in green. The third was herself, with brown hair and a purple dress she didn't actually have, but liked drawing. And over it she had written, "Delilah," in purple. The fourth was Bean, with his round otter face and his stick limbs. The fifth was a tall, thin, black shape with no features. She did not give the 5th figure a name. She had drawn arrows between the 5th figure and the figure of herself, and on each of the arrows she had written in tiny purple letters, "No." The arrows pointed both ways. Underneath the row of figures, she had written one line in her purple crayon. "Daddy says shh." I sat with the paper. I struggled to breathe. I stared at that paper for so long, but I had to get up off the floor at some point, so I forced myself up. I folded the paper back into the envelope, and I placed it into my jacket. I put the drawer back in the desk and stood up. I had one more place that I needed to go. The washdown station in the production wing had been pulled out, but the hatch was still in the floor. I didn't notice it the first time I walked past, because the washdown equipment had been mounted over it for years. It was a steel plate set flush in the concrete with a recessed handle, the kind of maintenance hatch I'd seen 100 times on job sites in my own work. I knelt down, and I lifted it. A short steel ladder went down 4 feet into a concrete crawlspace. The ceiling of the crawlspace was the underside of the production floor. The space was maybe 4 feet high, lit only by what came down through the hatch, with the cold, dead air that smelled like wet stone. I had a flashlight on my keychain, so I clicked it on, and I went down. I had to stoop. The crawlspace ran the length of the production wing under the floor I'd walked across as a 9-year-old, and the floor down here was poured concrete, gray and unfinished, with hairline cracks running through it where the slab had cured. The flashlight on my keychain was small enough that I had to sweep it across the floor section by section. Most of the slab was the same gray. About 15 feet from the ladder, near the wall on the south side of the building, there was a section of concrete that was a different gray. It was a rectangle, roughly 4 feet long by 2 feet wide. The edges of it were not perfectly straight, and the surface of it was a little rougher than the rest of the slab around it, because fresh concrete cures a little different from the slab it's been patched into, even when the work is done right. I'd patched concrete on job sites 100 times. I knew what a patch looked like. This patch was decades old. The color had set in long ago. I did not need to test it. I sat on the concrete next to it, and I put my hand flat on it. The concrete was cold. I knew I could sit there and spend an hour trying to pry it open, but I was not ready for what I might see inside. When I could finally move again, I climbed back up the ladder and closed the hatch. I walked out through the empty production room and the empty office hallway. As I approached the break room, my stomach began to feel painful again, and I couldn't bear to look into it when I walked past. I locked the side door, putting the cardboard square back where I found it. I then walked out to the gate. I put the keys in the lockbox and spun the dial. I sat in my car on the shoulder of that county road, and I took my phone out of my jacket pocket. I called my dad.
Hey, son.
I'd had a plan on the drive over about what I would say. I'd been thinking about it for weeks now, practicing sentences in my apartment while hoping that everything in my head was wrong. But none of those words were in my mouth now. I sat in the car with the phone to my ear and listened to my father breathing and waiting. I never noticed how patient he could be on the phone.
Eli, are you there?
Yeah, Dad. I'm here.
Are you okay?
I don't know, Dad. He waited again, and I tried my best not to cry. I had the phone to my ear, and I was listening to my father's breathing again. But somewhere between my previous words and the start of his next, something changed in his tone, even in that breathing.
Where are you, Eli?
I hung up my phone, and I dialed 3 numbers. That was a tough story to finish. Children should be protected, allowed to enjoy their youth and innocence. The idea that anyone could harm them is already a horrible thought, but to be harmed by your own parent, that is a sin beyond sin. Good night. I'm Darkness Prevails. You've been listening to Tales from the Break Room. You can now do everything on our new site. Listen to the show, submit your own story, and check out my other narrations, all in the same place. Go to Erie.fm. That's EERIE.fm. And consider becoming a member for $8 a month or $70 a year. That's the price of one video game a year, and it helps us to keep doing what we're doing now, especially since YouTube has decided to demonetize everyone and their dog. Members also get bonus stories, exclusive members-only shows, audiobooks, and ad-free listening to all EerieCast content. Again, that's Erie.fm. Thank you. Till next time, everyone, I'll be clocking out for now, but I'll be back again real soon. I wrote and narrated a brand new fully produced creepypasta called The Trade on my members-only podcast, Delete After Reading, over at Erie.fm. When a man discovers a tooth on his pillow, he remembers a deal he made with a disturbing voice under a house, and payment has become due. Listen now. Go to Erie.fm and become a premium member to support me and save me from YouTube. Listen to The Trade on Delete After Reading, and much more. That's Erie.fm. Thank you. Eater. A single word. No username to attribute. This story was emailed to me anonymously. It was titled only that. Eater. And when I read it, I realized the name fit the story perfectly. This allegedly true tale will send a chill down your spine and force you to rethink all the unspoken rules of the forest as you know them. because something out there is very, very hungry, and you wouldn't want to make it angry. My family lives in the southern part of Missouri on 22 acres. There are 3 houses on that property. My grandparents' house, which sits at the front by the gravel road. My parents' house, which is about a 5-minute walk back into the trees on a packed dirt path, which my dad maintains with a tractor. Then there's my uncle's house, another 5 minutes past mine on the same path, in a clearing my grandfather cut for him before I was born. Most of the rest of the acreage is woods, oak and hickory mostly, I think, and the back half of the property hits state forest. So once you go past my uncle's house, you're in trees for as far as you want to walk. I started going on these hikes back there alone the summer before high school. I wasn't really hiking, technically, since the trails were trails my dad and uncle had cut for hunting, and our family had been walking them for 40 years, but it sort of felt like hiking whenever I went. I would put a water bottle and a notebook in my backpack, and walk out there for an hour or two with no particular plan. I'd wanted to be a writer since 5th grade, when I read Mistborn for the first time, and by freshman year I'd started a fantasy novel that I was sure was going to be the next Stormlight Archive. It was bad. I know it was bad now that I look back on it, but even then I probably subconsciously knew it was bad. I was working on some magic system where mages drew power from the minerals in their own bones, and the more powerful the mage, the more bone mineral they had to grow. I'd spent most of the summer outlining this trilogy that I wanted to do. I had 3 books planned with a 4th that was going to surprise everybody. I even had a map I drew with colored pencils and labeled with names I was sure sounded foreign and significant. I had 3 pages of glossary at the back of my notebook. My main character was a girl named Sarah who could draw iron out of her own marrow, and her older brother Rin had been killed before the book started, but kept showing up in flashbacks where he taught her how to steal. The flashbacks were the part I was most proud of, since they let me write whole chapters where the main character wasn't doing anything action-related, and I'd figured out at some point that the parts I actually liked writing were not the action parts. But anyway, I'm ranting here. So whenever I hit a snag in my book or outlines, the woods were where I went to think about that kind of thing. On a weekend afternoon, I found a new spot. The leaves had just started to turn, and it was warm enough that I could go out in just a t-shirt. I brought a hoodie just in case, but I ditched it by the time I got past my uncle's house. I'd been stuck for a week on this scene where Sarah was supposed to figure out a clue about Rin that didn't add up, and I thought that if I went somewhere that I'd never set before, the scene would unstick. I would get new ideas. That's how I thought writer's block worked at 14. I walked past the spot I usually went to, which itself was a flat rock about 30 minutes from my house, overlooking a dry creek bed. I kept on going from there. I followed a deer trail off the main path that I'd noticed before but had never taken, and I went maybe another 20 minutes back, climbing carefully up a ridge, until I got to a place where 2 oak trees had grown close together, their roots making a kind of seat between them. That seat faced out across a hollow. The hillside on the other side of the hollow was covered in trees, but not as densely as the one I was on, so you could see between the trunks farther down the slope. I sat with my back to one of the oaks and pulled out my notebook. I wrote for a while. I'd brought a warm Pepsi I'd stolen from my dad's mini-fridge in the garage, and I drank it slowly, working on the clue scene. I gave up on the clue scene and started a flashback that I'd been wanting to write, where Rin was teaching Sarah how to read other people's faces. I had a whole speech he was going to give about how you could spot a person who was about to lie, since their eyebrows start to pull together a little before their mouth begins to move. I was very proud of the speech, not at all sure how to make it sound like a real teenage girl listening to her older brother, and not some teenagers writing. At some point I hit that mental wall again. I sat with my pen in my hand looking at what I'd written. I didn't like any of it. I closed the notebook and put it in my lap. I looked up across the hollow. On the opposite hillside, more or less directly across from where I was sitting, there was a cave opening. I hadn't seen it before. The angle of the slope had been hiding it from me on the walk up. It was about halfway up the hill, tall and narrow, about 7 feet high and 3 feet across. The inside was very dark. But there was a man standing at the mouth of that cave. He was tall, taller than my dad, and extremely thin. His skin seemed pale enough that I could see him clearly, with that darkness of the cave behind him. I couldn't tell from that distance if he was wearing clothes, and I'm still not totally sure. He had a face. He wasn't some faceless thing. I just couldn't see what his face looked like from that distance. But I could tell he was looking at me. I knew he was. His head was angled toward me, and not anywhere else. He raised his right hand. He turned it once at the wrist. A small, friendly-looking wave, like a neighbor across the road, but this was out in the middle of the woods. I was so confused, and honestly a bit creeped out, that I didn't wave back. It never even crossed my mind. I sat still with my notebook on my lap, pen in hand, wondering who he was. I watched him and waited, and I could tell he was waiting for me to do something. He stood there with his hand still up, for what felt like forever, but then he eventually lowered his hand. Then he turned and walked into the cave. The darkness inside that cave swallowed him whole. He didn't bend down to fit through the opening, even though the opening looked shorter than he was. He walked straight back in and was gone. I sat there for I don't know how long. I felt like I was waiting to see if he'd come back out. But I think I was actually waiting to see if my heart would ever slow down. He didn't come back out. After a while, I started to feel like I was being looked at by something I couldn't see. So I picked up my notebook, and I stood up, and I began to walk back along the trail I'd come up. I took the long route back. I walked down to the dry creek, and I followed it for about 10 minutes before I caught up to my dad's path. The long route went through more open trees, and I was able to see farther in every direction, making me feel safer. During my walk, I was coming up with explanations. Maybe I'd run into some tall hunter in pale clothes who was standing at a rock formation that looked like a cave at that distance. Maybe my eyes had been tired from riding for so long. Neither one felt true while I was telling it to myself. I knew I'd seen something. I just wanted to have seen something else. When I got home, my mom was on the phone in the kitchen, and my dad was watching a college football game in the living room. Never knew how he watched that stuff. Neither of them looked up when I came through the back door. I went to my room with the notebook, and I sat on my bed, writing down what I'd seen in the back of the notebook, in the section I used for ideas that I didn't want to forget. I wrote it in detail. I wanted to be able to read it later, and not to mix up or exaggerate anything while it was fresh on my mind. I thought about telling my parents about it. I knew exactly what would happen if I did, though. Right away, my mother would blame fantasy books, me reading them before bed, and my dad would say something about Mr. Velman down the road, sometimes hunting on our property, how he was going to talk to him about staying off of it. But that wasn't Mr. Velman. I wanted someone to take my story seriously if I was going to tell it. The only person I could think of was my cousin Daryl. Daryl lived in my uncle's house, his father's, and was 3 years older than me. We had a family bonfire coming up at the end of the week, and I decided I would try to tell him then. The bonfire came around a few nights later. We had bonfires most weekends in the fall. We had them in the clearing behind my parents' house, where my dad built a fire pit when I was little. My grandparents would walk down with their lawn chairs. My uncle and Daryl would come up from their house. Mom would put together hot dogs and chili. It was the kind of family thing I grew up with, and I always assumed every family did stuff like that, till I started high school and realized most of my friends only saw their cousins on holidays. I waited until everybody was settled with food, and most of the adults had a beer in their hand. Daryl had wandered to the edge of the firelight, where he liked to throw sticks into the dark whenever he got bored. I went over to him. "Hey, what's good? You done with that hot dog? Or are you just gonna let it die in your hand?" "I'm eating it, man. Looks like you're just holding it to me. Hey, sit down." He took my plate and stuck it on the log next to him. He pulled an extra Coke out of the cooler at his feet and pushed it toward me. Your mom really outdid herself with this chili." My grandma made that chili this time. Mom did the hot dog stuff and the dessert. See, that's a good system we got going there. 2 of them each doing their thing. You know, Mom won't even come over here when Grandma's cooking. She gets weird about it, like she thinks it's a competition. He cracked his Coke open. "What's up with you? You're being quiet over there. Got a weird look on your face." "Well, I was just wanting to tell you something. You want to hear it?" "Okay." "You can't laugh." Now I'm definitely gonna laugh. You realize that, right? Dude, that's the worst opener you can possibly have. You just guarantee to laugh whether what you tell me is funny or not. And frankly, I find that offensive. You trying to control my emotions. I'm serious, Daryl. I'm being completely serious right now. If you laugh, I'm walking back to the house, and you can have the rest of my Coke. Okay, geez, dang, I'm done. I'm not laughing. So what's the deal? Is it about a girl? Tell me this is about a girl. She cute? She chubby? Daryl, it's not about a girl. Alright then. So last weekend I went up the ridge, past the dry creek. Like, real far past it. And I mean way past where Papa shot that buck 2 years ago. The big one. I found a new spot there that I'd never been to. There's these 2 oaks growing close together, and there's a place to sit between their roots. I was up there for a while, doing my writing. Alright, so far so good, I'm with you. And on the other side of the hollow, there's apparently a cave. Come on now, there's no cave up there. I've been all over that ridge, there's no cave up there. I know there is, I'm telling you. There's a cave on the opposite hillside, about halfway up the slope. And while I was sitting in my new spot, there was somebody standing in front of it. The stick he was holding stopped mid-turn. He looked up at me from under the brim of his hat. Wait, standing in front of what? In front of the cave. Like an actual person standing there? Yeah, a tall, thin, pale person, standing in front of the cave, which I'd never seen before, on the other side of a hollow I'd been hiking past since I was a kid. He was just standing there at the mouth of it, like he had stepped out of it to just check the weather. Alright then, that's just a hunter. That's gotta be a hunter, dude. Somebody Mr. Velman or one of those guys let on the property and didn't tell us about. Bastards. I thought it was a hunter too for about 3 seconds. What do you mean? Was he wearing orange or camouflage or anything? Velman always wears orange when he's out there. No, his clothes were pale. But this guy, he waved at me. He did that sideways look without turning his head. The look he used in middle school when he wanted me to know he knew I was being weird. He set the stick down across his knees. He waved at you? The pale guy at the cave waved at you across a hollow. Yeah, it was a normal-looking wave. Like, real neighborly, you know? Alright then, so a weird guy you don't know at some cave you've never seen before decides he's gonna wave at you from across the way. Is that right? Right. And what'd you do? I didn't wave back. Man, are you serious? You didn't wave back? You don't not wave back at a hunter, dude. That's the worst possible thing you can do. That's like a personal insult. Those guys take that real personal, too. They go out hunting all day and the only person they see in the woods doesn't even wave back at them. That's gonna stick in their head for a week. Daryl, he wasn't a hunter. How do you know that? There's no way you can tell from across a hollow if a guy is or isn't a hunter. You literally just told me you thought he was a hunter for 3 seconds. That's because when I didn't wave back, he turned around and walked back into the cave. The opening of the cave was shorter than he was, but he didn't bend down to fit, if that makes sense. He didn't have to duck down, he just walked in straight up. And I'm not sure how that's possible. He turned the stick a few more times. He was looking at me instead of the fire now. Are you screwing with me right now? Like, for real? I'm not. I'm being 100% with you. Man, I know I tease you about your fantasy book stuff, but if you're messing with me right now, you gotta tell me. Since I'm starting to actually believe you, and I don't want to be the dumb cousin who believed you. Don't make me regret it. I'm not messing around. I wouldn't be making this up. I'm not gonna make something up to mess with my own cousin at his own family's bonfire about a cave. I mean, heck, I don't want to be telling you this right now, because nobody wants to see something weird in the woods. Depends on your definition of weird. He nodded, and went quiet for a second. The fire popped then, startling me. It threw a small shower of orange sparks. Mom was telling my grandma something on the other side of the fire about a casserole she'd brought over earlier in the week. Well, I do believe you, but I don't know what to do with that fact, but I do believe you. Well, good, and thanks, I guess. He shrugged. These hills, man, I don't know how to explain it to you. I felt watched out here ever since I was a little kid. Anytime I go too far past the clearing, I feel it, even in the daytime, even when I know there are people not that far behind me. There's this feeling that hits when I get past where Papa's old fence used to be. I figured everybody felt it, and that was just what hiking the back of the property was. And I never said nothing about it to my dad. He'd think I was being a big baby. So, you think there's something off about this place? Based on what I felt, yeah, and I felt it for years. I mean, I felt something on the walk home from the ridge that day. Not before I saw the guy, but definitely after. The whole hike back, I had that feeling on me. You think it's the same thing? Couldn't tell you, man. Not sure. I think the feeling came from seeing him. You see something creepy, you go home, and you feel creeped out, like watching a scary movie at the theater. So, if you ask me personally, I think it was just a reaction to seeing something weird. You don't agree? Well, I think you saying the feeling doesn't mean anything is what people say when they don't want it to mean something. You said it yourself, you felt something after, but you didn't feel it before. But yeah, that's the point. It is the point. That's what I'm saying, man. He crossed his arms and nodded, like he had won a debate. The next 2 weeks were pretty normal. School was school. I worked on my book when I could, and I stopped going past my uncle's house when I went out walking. I'd been sleeping kind of bad since the Ridge incident, with weird short dreams I couldn't remember, and a heavy feeling in my head all day that just wouldn't go away, even if I drank coffee. I figured I was getting sick. The night I'm about to write about happened later that month. I went to bed around 10, and I woke up at what my phone said was after 2 a.m. I thought I'd heard something. I lay there for maybe 30 seconds without moving, but then I heard it again. This wet, slurping sound, with a ripping underneath it. It was coming from the front yard. My bedroom is at the front of the house. My window faces the front yard and the gravel drive that runs along the side of the house. It turns into the dirt path back to my uncle's place. Our front yard isn't lit at night, except for whatever spillover comes off the porch light. But the street light at the end of our driveway by the gravel road does throw a little extra light onto the grass closer to the road. I got out of bed, and I went to my window, pulling the curtain back about 3 inches and looking out. There was something in the yard, about 20 feet from my window. It was in the patch of grass between the porch and the gravel drive, at the edge of the porch's light's reach. It was crouched on its haunches with its head down over something on the ground. It was pale and thin. Its head moved in fast, jerky pulses while it ate. I couldn't see what it was eating, and the thing itself was hard to make out. The screen on my window had that fine mesh that makes everything beyond it real grainy looking, and the porch light wasn't lighting that spot well. I stood there with the curtain in my hand. I'm not going to pretend I had a brave reaction to it. I let go of the curtain and let it fall, and I went back to bed. I pulled my comforter up over my head, and I lay there listening to my own breathing, trying to convince myself the thing in the yard was a coyote, and that if I went and looked again, I would see a coyote and feel stupid. But I did not go and look again. I woke up the next morning to my mom yelling. She wasn't yelling at me. She was outside, and her yelling voice was traveling up to my window. I heard my dad's voice too, lower, and another voice that sounded like my uncle. I got out of bed and went to my window again, and without thinking I pulled the curtain back. There they were, standing in the yard, all 3 of them, in the same spot that thing had been the night before. My uncle was holding something, and he seemed real mad. I put my pants on and a hoodie and went down. My mom looked over at me when I came out the front door and started to say something that began with, "Honey," and stopped. My dad shook his head at me without saying a word. My uncle wouldn't look at me at all. He was holding something familiar in his hand. A dog collar. Specifically the collar that belonged to his chihuahua, Sisyphus. Sisyphus was a rowdy, barking chihuahua, and my uncle would let that thing out to do whatever at any time of the day or night. I was confused as to why he was holding Sisyphus's collar, but then I saw what he had in his other hand, and my stomach turned. It was the back half of Sisyphus's head. The body was gone. When I looked down, there was a stain on the grass where the body probably had been, and some other stuff that I am not going to list. The head and the collar were the only pieces accounted for. My uncle had this expression that probably meant, If I find whoever did this, they're not going to have a face any longer. He kept going on about the freaking coyotes. He said it 3 or 4 times in a row, looking at the ground. He looked up at the trees after on the other side of the gravel drive, like he was about to walk right in there and tear them apart with his bare hands. I saw something out here last night. My mom looked at me. I could tell she had been about to say something else and stopped. My uncle was desperate for information, and he stepped forward. What was it? Around 2 in the morning, I woke up, and I heard something outside, so I went to the window and looked out. There was something right here at this exact spot. I pointed to the patch of grass my uncle was standing on. Honey, why didn't you wake us up? My mom asked. It was through the screen and it was dark out. I thought it was a coyote, but I couldn't see very good, so I went back to bed. So it was a coyote? I don't know what I saw. I told myself it was a coyote. Whatever it was kneeling down and chewing on something. It looked pale and skinny. Its head was moving fast. So you don't know? You couldn't see good? No, I couldn't, Uncle Doug. I'm sorry. The screen on my window has that mesh on it, and the porch light isn't very good out here. But I'm telling you, I saw something. You saw a coyote eating my dog and went back to bed. I didn't know it was eating Sisyphus. I didn't know there was a dog out here. I thought it was a wild thing eating a wild thing. I'm sorry, I don't know what else to say. My uncle cursed at me then, and my dad put a hand on his shoulder to calm him down. Then my uncle shook the hand off and walked across the gravel drive. More like stormed off. He went into the trees. Head back inside, honey. I think you've seen enough, Mom told me, and I went in. I could hear my mom say behind me to my dad, Why did you let him come over here? Do you think he needed to see that? And my dad followed up with, Dear, he's 14. He can handle it. And by then I was back at the front door. For the rest of the day, I sat at the kitchen table while everyone went in and out, and the conversation kept circling, but nobody had an answer. My uncle was sure it was coyotes. My grandfather brought up the mountain lion he was sure had been spotted 2 summers earlier. And my mom said it was probably a stray dog. The conversations were heated and dramatic for a few hours, but nobody came back to me. I thought I would be interrogated, but I wasn't. What I think happened, and I don't know this for sure, but I have thought a lot about it, is that everybody had picked a story and my story didn't fit. The easy answer was just a wild animal. The solution to that would just be to hunt it or call animal control. But if it was something else, something that had to kneel down to eat, like a person, it became a bit more complicated. By the next afternoon, my uncle had pulled his rifle out of the gun safe at his house and set it across his lap on the porch, and he sat there until dark. The night after that, he was out there again, and the night after that. Within a week, he had set up a pop-up tent in the clearing behind his house and was starting to sleep in it with the rifle next to him. My aunt would come over to my house and sit at the kitchen table with my mom, talking about how to get him to come back inside. She would cry sometimes, and my mom would put her hand on her sister's hand and not have anything to say. I went back to school the day after the rest of the family found Sisyphus. There was nobody at my school I could have explained any of this to, and I'd still been sleeping badly since the ridge. But after Sisyphus, it got worse, and the worse it got, the less I trusted what I was seeing. After about a week, I was tired enough that I had an idea. After school, I texted Daryl, Hey, you want to go take a look at that cave? He didn't text back for almost an hour, but when he did, it said, Okay, when? We picked the next weekend. When the next weekend came around, Daryl met me on the dirt path between our houses around 2 in the afternoon. He had his backpack on, with what I figured was a water bottle in it, and probably a knife somewhere, knowing him. He was wearing his Cardinals cap backwards and his beat-up Carhartt. I had my notebook and a flashlight, even though it was the middle of the day. Where's your dad at? Out at that dang tent. He was out there when I got up, like before sunrise. My mom said he came inside for 10 minutes around midnight for coffee, and he didn't even sit down. He made it in the to-go cup and walked back out. Has he been talking about anything? Oh, he talks about Sisyphus, that's all. Keeps going back to him, like he's still figuring out what happened. He won't talk about going back to work. He's missed, I think, 4 days now, and my mom keeps telling him he can't sleep out there forever, and he just kind of looks at her and doesn't answer. It's freaking her out. It's freaking me out. I'm sorry about that, dude. That's not your fault. It's Sisyphus. He raised that dog from a puppy, my dad. He used to keep 'em in his hoodie pocket when he was tiny. He used to sneak 'em bits of ribeye under the table at Thanksgiving. He took it personal that something got him, and now he's out there since he thinks if he doesn't kill whatever it was, he's letting Sisyphus down. Hell, I doubt he'd react like that if it was me that got killed. He punched me on the shoulder. We laughed. We walked out the path past my parents' house and past the old chicken coop my grandma had stopped using when I was 11. Once we were past my uncle's yard, we went into the trees. Daryl had been to the spot under the 2 oaks before, back when we were younger and would build forts together, but he hadn't been past it in a while. You sure it was the ridge with the deer trail and not the one farther down? Yeah, the one you take off past the dry creek, past where the deer trail forks left, and there's that broken down fence post Papa never moved. Right, okay, I think I know which one you're talking about. Man, I haven't been up that high in a while, not since we were like 10 or 11. Me neither. Well, until last weekend. We climbed slow and careful. The leaves were brown and crunchy on the ground, and the air had that famous southern Missouri autumn bite. Daryl walked with his hands in his hoodie pocket, and I had mine in my jeans. About 10 minutes from my tree, a feeling hit me. It's hard to describe, but it was like someone standing too close behind you in the checkout line, when the back of your neck and the tops of your shoulders go hot with the awareness of someone next to you. This was that same pressure, but there was no one behind me, and yet it was on me from all sides at once. I stopped on the trail. Daryl was a few feet ahead, and he stopped a second after I did. He turned around. Tell me you feel that. I nodded. Yeah, I do. How long you been feeling it yourself? Probably 10 minutes, maybe a little more. Started feeling it back where the trail bent past that big rock, the one shaped like a shoe. So you believe me now, that it's more than just being creeped out? Yeah, actually. I think there's something more to it. As we continued, the deer trail switched back twice, and we lost it once but found it again. I remembered the place where it forked off the main path, and I remembered the slope, and we found those 2 oaks where I'd left them. The seat between the roots was full of dry leaves now. The cave was on the other side of the hollow. We had to come down out of my tree, cross the bottom of the hollow on a slope of leaves and exposed limestone, and climb the other hill. It took us about 20 minutes from leaving my tree to standing on the opposite hillside, and another 5 for us to find the cave opening, since coming up at it from below is a different angle than I'd been looking at it from across the hollow. The cave mouth was at the base of a limestone shelf that stuck out of the hillside about chest high above the slope. The shelf above it overhung by a foot or 2, so you could see how the rain would have run off it and not down into the cave itself. The opening of the rock was clean of moss in a halo, where everywhere else on the limestone was green with it. There was a smell coming out of that cave. It wasn't terribly strong, just a low, sour smell. Made me think of meat being left out. We could only really smell it when the wind was pushing out of the opening at us. It was kind of like the cave was breathing. We stood about 20 feet from the opening, and we didn't get closer than that. Dread had been building up between us since the watched feeling had hit, and I could definitely say it was at its full weight now. My stomach felt heavy, and my hands were cold inside my pockets. Daryl was breathing heavily through his nose. Both of us were looking at the cave. The first 10 or 12 feet of the cave floor got the afternoon sunlight, but past that, the sun stopped and the dark started, with a sharp line between them. There was something on the floor of the cave, in the strip of ground right at the line where the sun stopped. It was white, and it was bumpy, like somebody had spilled a bag of something onto the floor but never cleaned it up. It took us maybe 10 seconds to figure out we were looking at bones. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The white, bumpy strip was bones, small ones at the edge of the light, curved fragments and joints. Past them, the bones got bigger and more numerous. A foot or 2 into the dark, the floor was just bones, as far as my eye could follow, and those bones went on until the cave bent and I could no longer see. A sound came a few seconds after we figured out the bones. A wet sound, halfway between chewing and tearing. The cave walls bounced the echo around and made the source impossible to pin down. It was somewhere in there. Could be 100 feet away, could be 20. There was that tearing underneath it, with a faint clicking sound, and the wet sound got stronger. I looked over at Daryl, and I found him already looking at me. I was sure we both had the same expression. We turned around at the same time, and we walked back down along the trail. We power walked instead of running, and we didn't speak until we made it across the hollow, once we were on top of my ridge again, past the 2 oaks. By then the cave was hidden behind the slope again, and we felt safer. We stopped then. Daryl sat down with his hands on his knees and his head down. I sat in the leaves a few feet away. What was that? I don't know, man. I'm being serious. I'm being completely serious right now. What was that, dude? What did we just look at? What did we hear? I mean, you heard it too, right? I did, and I'm telling you, I have no idea. You've been on this property your whole life. I'm just a freshman in high school who reads fantasy books. I don't know what's in caves. What did we just hear in there? Could that be a bear? Bears aren't pale, they're not thin, they don't stand at the mouth of caves like a person, and they don't wave at people. You're saying what was in there just now was the same thing you saw that day. That's what I'm saying. It gave off the same vibe. Well, I guess that makes sense. It's gotta be the same thing, right? You saw it go back in there that time. There's only one though, right? Not multiple? I really freaking hope there's only one. He pulled at the leaves at his feet. He picked up a curled brown one and crumbled it between his fingers. We can't tell my dad. I mean, he's already out there with a rifle. He's losing it, man. He's been gone for 2 days at a stretch eating jerky he packed himself. Mom's been finding empty Pringles cans in the laundry. He came home yesterday with a scratch on his arm, and he wouldn't say where it came from. He can't know about a cave full of bones, man. He'll go straight to it. He'll walk straight in there with the rifle thinking he's going to take care of the situation. Yep, we can't tell him. My lips are sealed. And we can't tell your parents either. Your dad would tell my dad. That's how those two are. They tell each other everything. Your dad'll be on his porch with a Coors 30 seconds after you tell him. I'm not going to tell my parents anything, I promise. This is just between us. Good. My dad ain't ready to leave the woods. I can't make him leave the woods. I've been trying. My mom's been trying too. He just doesn't listen to us no more. Maybe I can talk him into going to town for a couple days. I don't know. I'll try something. But if I can't get him out of here, he's going to be back in there. He's going to find that cave eventually. At some point, we got up and walked back along my dad's path, and we came out at the clearing behind my house. From there, we split up. Daryl went towards his dad's house, and I went home to eat the dinner my mom had kept warm. The week after we went to the cave, that exhaustion I'd been dealing with got worse, and it was starting to scare me. I'd been a good sleeper my whole life, the kind of kid who went to bed at 10 and would wake up at 7 feeling exactly right. But after the cave, that changed. I would lie in bed for hours without going to sleep. I'd feel myself drifting off, almost getting there, but then snap back awake, with my heart racing. Most of the night I just looked at the ceiling, ending up asleep for maybe an hour near morning, after I'd given up trying. That tiredness showed up during the day. I felt heavy and my mind was foggy, like I was wearing an invisible, oversized, drenched coat. My grades started slipping by the 3rd week. Mr. Casey, my algebra teacher, asked me after class one day if everything was okay at home, and I said things were fine. In 4th period English, we were reading The Most Dangerous Game out loud, going around the room, a paragraph at a time. I hadn't been paying enough attention. I closed my eyes for what I thought was just a second, but when I opened them, Mrs. Parson was on the floor in front of her desk. She was on her back, and that pale thing from the cave was on top of her, crouched over her chest. Its head was down in her stomach, and that wet noise from the cave was now coming out of her, coming from that thing's mouth. Her shirt was open, and the front of her was open under the shirt. There was so much blood. Her hands were going up and down at her sides in small panicked twitches, like she was trying to do something with them, but couldn't. I screamed and jumped up then, the desk falling over sideways in front of me. The whole class turned and looked at me. Mrs. Parson was at the front of the room with her book open in her hands now, in one piece, perfectly okay. She looked at me worried and asked if I was all right and whether I needed to see the nurse. I said no. I sat down at my desk and apologized. My face felt really hot, partially from fear and partially from embarrassment. The kid behind me, whose name was Caden, picked up my desk for me. I told everybody I'd had a bad dream and woke up wrong, and the reading kept going. I sat there the rest of that period with my hands flat on my desk and my eyes on Mrs. Parson. She kept teaching. The bell rang, and we left. By the end of the week, there had been 2 more incidents like it. One time was in the cafeteria. I'd closed my eyes for what was probably 1 second to rest, but when I opened them, that pale thing was crouched on a cafeteria table 8 feet from me. A kid I knew named Wesley was on his back on the table, his arm pulled out of his shoulder. The thing had Wesley's arm in its mouth and was chewing through muscle at the top of it. All the while, Wesley was making a high-pitched air sound that was not a scream, but desperately wanted to be one. I dropped my tray. The crash made the tables around me look up. When I looked back, Wesley was at his own table the next row over, eating tater tots, and the pale thing was gone. The other time was in the hallway before homeroom. The janitor was mopping the floor outside my locker. I had my locker open and was looking at my books, and when I closed the locker door, the janitor was on his back on the wet floor, and that pale thing had its face in his neck. I dropped my backpack. When I looked again, the janitor was up the hallway pushing his mop bucket, as though nothing had happened. I began having trouble looking at anything for too long. I would look up at the chalkboard and think, if I look away for 1 second and look back, that pale thing is going to be there in front of me, eating Mrs. Parson again. And I was so scared that at some point I would look away and look back, but nothing would change this time. It would still be there, eating. I even began to avoid eye contact in the hallway, taking longer routes between classes that kept me near big windows and out of dim places. I told my mom I might be coming down with something, so I wouldn't have to explain why I was so tired and acting so weird. I don't remember falling asleep that night, but I had a dream. I was standing at my bedroom window in the middle of the night, in the same position I'd been in when I saw that thing in the yard with Sisyphus. The window was open, and the screen was in. The yard was lit by the porch light and the street light by the road, brighter than it should be in real life. The pale thing was crouched in the same patch of grass it had been before, in the same posture, with its head down. This time it had heard me, and it looked up. Its face was so black. Every feature you would expect, eyes, nose, and mouth, seemed instead to be black voids, and its skin was bone white, the mouth full of small black teeth. And it smiled at me. That's when it lifted up the thing it had been gnawing on. It held it out toward me too, palms open, wanting me to see. It was the top half of my dad's head, everything else concave and hollowed out. I started trying to rip the screen out of the window, pulling at it with both hands and hitting it with my fists. The screen was old aluminum. I was screaming my dad's name. The pale thing was watching me try to get the screen out, and it was still smiling, and I think it was waiting for me to come through. I woke up then. I was sitting in my bed, and I'd been screaming in real life. My mom was at the doorway with the hall light on behind her, out of breath. Honey, I'm right here. It's okay. Look at me. You're okay. I'm right here," she said as she sat down on the bed next to me and put her hand on my back. The other hand went to my forehead, reminding me of when I was little and sick. I sat there with my comforter bunched up in my fists, and I tried to slow my breathing. She rubbed circles on my back with her thumb. "You had a nightmare, honey, that's all. You're okay." "Where's Dad? Where's Dad? Is Dad okay?" Yes, he is. I just left him in the bed. Are you okay?" "I don't know, Mom. Is it the Sisyphus stuff, or maybe something going on at school?" "I don't know, Mom. I just know I woke up screaming. I'm sorry I woke you up. Honey, don't apologize for that. You don't have to be sorry. You're allowed to have nightmares, it's okay. But are you having a lot of nightmares? Be honest with me." "No." "Are you sure? I've heard you up in the night a lot recently. Are you sleeping okay? Yes, Mom, everything's fine, I promise. And it was just one nightmare. I don't even know what it was about. She looked at me for a long moment, then she said okay and kissed my forehead. She got up and went back down the hall, bidding me goodnight. I know she didn't believe me, but I think she could also tell that pushing on it anymore wasn't going to get us anywhere. That weekend, my uncle came back from the woods. He had been spending most of his time out there since Sisyphus, going further out each time. My aunt told my mom he had walked out to the back of the property with his rifle one morning at first light, that she had not seen him since. By the second day, he had been gone almost 30 hours. My dad and grandpa were getting ready to go look for him when he just came out of the trees behind his house. He was alone, and he didn't have his rifle anymore. He was walking with both arms held tight against his chest, his hands tucked under the opposite armpits. It looked like he was freezing, and he was even shaking like he was. And he wasn't talking. My aunt got to him first and put her hands on his face. Doug, baby, look at me. Are you hurt? Did something happen out there? Doug, please look at me. She had her hands on his face, and he wouldn't focus on her. His eyes were going past her shoulder somewhere, out into the trees behind the house. My grandfather and my dad came up after, and I came last. My dad spoke to him. Doug, hey, look here, brother, talk to me. Tell me what happened. My dad got down lower and tried to get under my uncle's line of sight, but my uncle's eyes kept sliding away. My grandfather walked around to my uncle's other side, putting a hand on the back of his neck. Doug, was it an animal? My grandpa asked. Did something jump you out there? Just nod for me if it was an animal, son. You don't have to talk right now, just nod. But my uncle didn't nod. Doug, please, my father begged. We got him into a kitchen chair we pulled out onto the porch, and we all stood there around him. He was shivering still, keeping his hands under his armpits. He didn't seem injured anywhere that we could see. There was dirt at his hairline, and his clothes were filthy from a night outdoors, but that was it so far. When he sat down, he did so slowly, and after he was all the way down, he pulled his hands out from under his armpits, and he held them out for us to see. He was missing 3 fingers, 2 from his right hand, and 1 from his left. The stumps were short and clean, not jagged, like whatever had taken them had done so in a single swipe or bite. My aunt screamed. My dad got down on the porch and held my uncle's face, while my grandfather went into the house to dial 911. My aunt was on the floor crying into my uncle's shoulder, and he was looking at his hands like they weren't even his. The ambulance arrived in about 20 minutes. The EMTs got my uncle into the back, and my aunt rode with him while my dad followed in his truck. Daryl and my grandparents and my mom and I stayed at the house. My grandmother made coffee. Daryl kept asking the adults if his dad was going to be okay. I'd never seen him so scared. My uncle was admitted that night. They had no real explanation for him at the hospital. They cleaned the wounds and gave him fluids and antibiotics. They ran scans on his head. He still wouldn't talk to anybody. They kept him for 2 days for observation, and on the 3rd day, my aunt and Daryl checked into a Hampton Inn near the hospital. My uncle finally said that he could not go home. The night after my aunt and Daryl left for the Hampton Inn, I woke up. The clock on my dresser said 3:42 a.m. The lights in my room were off, except for the street light outside, coming in through the curtains. I hadn't closed them completely. My bedroom door was shut, and I could hear my mom and dad talking in their bedroom down the hall. Low voices. I couldn't tell what they were saying. As I woke up, I felt it before I saw it. Something was in the corner of my room. The corner was the dark corner, where my dresser stood against the wall and the streetlight didn't reach. Whatever was in that corner was crouched on the floor next to the dresser, with its head turned toward me. I couldn't see it well. The corner was dark, but I could make out a pale, crouched shape with the head pointed in my direction. I knew instantly. I knew before I even sat up in bed. I was so very tired down to my bone, but I wasn't afraid. I was angry. I had nothing left in me to be afraid with. I sat up and looked at it across the room, and it looked back at me. I couldn't see its eyes, but I could feel which direction its head was pointed. "Why are you here? Why are you tormenting my family?" I said, wanting to shout, but also not wanting my parents to come in here. But the entire time I thought it was another dream, another hallucination. The thing in the corner began to move. It moved its head, and then it spoke. The voice was higher pitched than a man's voice, and it said, "You never said hello." I sat there, the comforter at my waist, my hands on the edge of the mattress. It was just a dream, I thought, but it didn't feel like the usual dream. "Hello," I said. My voice came out shaky and weak. "Hello. I'm sorry. Hello." In the corner, the shape moved again. From the little I could make out, I think it smiled. The smile was a small white bend in the dark. Then I watched it stand up. My room was about 8 or 9 feet at the ceiling, and as it stood, it had to lower its head. It walked over to my window. The window was open only about 6 inches, and the screen was still in. It pushed the screen out effortlessly, and it went headfirst through that tiny opening. The opening was too narrow for something the size of a person, but somehow it went through anyway. And then it was gone. I sat motionless in my bed. I knew then I was supposed to be very afraid, as I realized this was no dream. But even then, after that realization, I felt nothing but tired. But instead of trying to go to sleep just yet, I got out of bed and I went to my window. I closed it and locked it. I pulled the curtains closed and I turned on every light in my room. Then I went back to the window and peered outside through the curtain. There was nothing there. It's been a year since all this happened. My uncle eventually did come home, but he moved my aunt and Daryl out of our family acreage, into some house on the other side of Springfield, and he doesn't come back to visit. Daryl does come back without him sometimes on holidays. My uncle has never told us what happened out there in the woods. And for us, nothing else has happened. I've slept fine since that night. That watched feeling has stopped. I've not gone walking past my uncle's old house since. But to this day, I wish I'd only waved back. I really enjoyed this story. Turns the whole "don't reply to voices in the woods" thing on its head. Apparently, if you're simply too rude to those things from beyond, well, an uncle might end up losing a finger. Good night. Thank you all so much for tuning in to Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. I wrote and narrated a brand new creepypasta that's been fully produced over at Eerie.fm in my premium members-only podcast, Delete After Reading. So if you can't wait for more scary stories narrated by me, go to Eerie.fm, sign up to be a premium member, and start listening now. And you'll be getting a lot more bonuses too, like every one of my shows ad-free for as long as you're a member, exclusive horror novels, both audiobooks and ebooks, and more. That's Eerie.fm. Thank you. Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one. So you may have heard on my other podcast, Tales from the Break Room, that I am sick right now. So this episode is sort of a narration gauntlet. Let me see how many stories I can narrate this week before I feel like I want to die. But before I die, you should definitely head over to Eerie.fm. You can listen to this show and all the podcasts I narrate or host, and every EerieCast show, all in one place. And you can even sign up to be a premium member, which keeps us alive no matter what other platforms might do. And you get tons of hours of bonus content only for members. In fact, paying members get access to the Unexplained Encounters bonus story catalog. Stories you've never heard before, like the one I narrated a few days ago, which was about a mysterious bag of dog bones and what they made one boy do. That's Eerie.fm. EERIE.fm. Thank you. Haunting at 133 Fifth Avenue, Roebling, New Jersey. From Mark C. When I was younger, about 9 years old, we moved from Levittown, Pennsylvania, to 133 Fifth Avenue, Roebling, New Jersey. The house had been abandoned for quite a while when we moved in. My father had some work done on the place, and at one point the workers asked him when he made coffee. There was apparently coffee made on the stove, but he hadn't been there. No one had been. Not long after moving in, my brother and I were there sometimes alone, as my parents would be at bingo at the local firehouse. One night we were both sitting on the couch watching TV, when we witnessed what looked like blood dripping in large amounts from the ceiling, right in front of us. When my brother went over and touched the carpet, the liquid just disappeared. Then, as my brother sat back down, we saw shoe prints running across the carpet, and he could see the actual impressions as it happened. Then, behind those shoe prints, we saw bare footprints running after those shoe prints. Suddenly, our front door blew open, and the screen door was ripped off the hinges. We both got up in our pajamas and ran to the bingo hall to our parents. That wasn't all. There were many occurrences, such as knives sticking to the walls, a hatchet in the back shed door on the inside of the house. We saw one night, my father and us two sons, a woman dressed in a white wedding dress, gliding up the stairs from the first floor all the way up to the third floor and into a room where she disappeared. My father and the two of us also had been awakened many times with some very heavy feelings as the covers were pulled completely off. My father contacted a priest friend of his from the army. He told him to make crosses out of aluminum foil and place them on every door. But then things got much worse. Eventually, my father's friend, the priest, came to bless the house, and he had all of us follow him to every corner in every room as he prayed. He started down in the basement and went up to the third floor. He threw holy water in every corner, and we kept hearing loud bangs and doors shutting. After we finally got to the last bedroom, the priest looked at this mirror, a very old one my father had found in the basement and cleaned up. That's when it all started. So the priest blessed the mirror. Then my father told him how he had found it. The priest said that the mirror was the cause of all these problems, and that he was to give it away, not sell it, but to give it to someone who would willingly take it. He gave us a prayer to say every day, to keep what he said was a poltergeist away. He said that he had researched the house and found it was built on ancient Indian burial grounds. Since my grandmother had recently passed away down the street, he said most likely it was her chasing the poltergeist out of the house. After that night, things became very calm, and even the feeling in the house was no longer heavy. The priest also told us the previous owner had hung himself in the second-floor bedroom years before. We ended up moving out of that house about a year later. We also asked the neighbors, and they told us the stories of the house we didn't know. It was quite an experience as a kid my age back then, so I'm definitely a believer of ghosts and poltergeists now. A horror I left in my childhood, and plan to keep it that way. From Ari. This encounter happened to me when I was around 6, and I tried to forget it ever happened, just so I can try to live a normal life. I would go to my family farm a few days away from my home nearly every year or so. I'd been going to this farm since I was a baby, so this place wasn't relatively new to me, and large dangerous wildlife was an uncommon sighting, but not necessarily rare. I only hope that what I saw that day was just a sick wild dog, maybe some prank pulled on me by the neighbors that lived a little bit away. That day was going pretty normally, except for us getting a few new cows. My granddad was down in the paddocks with them for a while I stayed up at the house with my little sister, who was around 5 years old at the time. We were playing around with the old binoculars that our grandparents happened to have for us, so we wouldn't complain about being bored. At the time, I was spying down on the back paddocks from my house's back patio, as the cows down there had some funky patterns, like funny splotches of black and brown over the white fur, like a canvas with paint splatters, or the pattern my favorite cow had, like a messy heart over her shoulder. It was around 3 p.m. at the time. The shadows were already looming across the closer paddocks, and my granddad had started making his way back to the house, his jeans moving over his shaky legs that had been worn down by time, with his checkered black and red polo shirt that seemed to never age. I didn't pay it much mind as I continued to observe the cows. After a few minutes, the cattle started to go crazy, running around and stomping around with erratic movements. I slowly followed their eyes, and I saw this large dog-like creature with what looked like patchy black fur and deathly gray skin, which made it look like it came straight from the movie series Resident Evil or the movie I Am Legend due to its almost dead look. I watched it run against the fence line of the paddock near the cows with unnerving speed. It scared me out of my off-branded denim dress, as I had never seen a creature of that size or description around here. Luckily, it was on the side with the forest, and electric wires lined both sides of the fence, but I never actually got to get a clear look at what it was. The way it ran sent a shiver down my spine. I never told my parents or granddad either, as I didn't want to be seen as attention-seeking or a liar. I would continue to see it roam around that paddock for a few days, always running across the fence line, almost like it had a schedule it couldn't break. But it never stayed still long enough for me to actually see it. After a while, we ended up selling the house and moving away. I never got to identify the creature, but its unmatched speed and horror film-like run continues to haunt me. To this day, I try to stay away from my old family farm, and if I have to go near it, I'll take a detour. It knew my name. From Anonymous. People always ask why I remember every detail of this story so clearly. Temperature, sounds, even the exact position of furniture inside the shelter. I think your brain records things differently when it genuinely believes you might die. Every second from that night feels burned into me with unnatural clarity. I can still sketch the layout of the room from memory. I can still remember how the air smelled when I opened the door to leave the next morning. Most nights I can ignore it, but every once in a while I'll hear somebody whistle outside my apartment building, and for a few seconds, I'm right back there again. This happened in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan during the last week of January 2022. I'd gone out alone for 3 days to photograph abandoned logging sites buried in the snow. I wasn't inexperienced. I'd been hiking and winter camping since high school, and I usually preferred being alone in the woods. No traffic or people, just the weather and distance. I had a satellite phone, emergency supplies, and extra fuel. I wasn't some idiot wandering into the forest unprepared. The area I chose had once been active logging land back in the 1940s and 50s. Most of the roads weren't maintained anymore, but old maps still showed where the camps and supply structures used to stand. I parked my truck at a locked forestry gate and hiked nearly 7 miles north along a frozen road. Snow reached almost to my knees in some places. The woods there were dense enough to block most of the wind, which sounds comforting until you realize how quiet that makes everything. Even during daylight, the forest felt closed in. Trees packed tightly together, long stretches where you couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. Around dusk, I reached the shelter I planned to stay in overnight. It sat beside a narrow frozen creek at the bottom of a shallow basin, surrounded by ridges. The structure itself was old but stable, with cinder block walls, a rusted stove, 2 small windows, and a heavy wooden door swollen from moisture and cold. Somebody had clearly used it recently. There were old food wrappers in the corner and melted candle wax on a shelf near the stove. The weird thing was the silence around the place. I couldn't even hear a bird out there. No distant cracking branches either. Nothing really. And I noticed something else before going inside. Tracks. Bare footprints leading from the creek toward the trees behind the shelter. At first glance, they looked human, but something about them was off. The toes appeared to be too long, almost more finger-like, and the impressions sank unusually deep into the snow. I crouched down to look closer, and realized the stride between each print was enormous, easily 6 feet apart. I remember actually laughing quietly to myself because my brain refused to process what I was seeing. I told myself they had to be distorted somehow, maybe by melting and refreezing snow. Inside the shelter, I unpacked my gear, lit the stove, and tried to ignore those tracks. By around 9 o'clock, the temperature outside had dropped brutally fast, The kind of cold where even stepping outside to pee hurts your lungs. I sat near the stove reading under a lantern for maybe an hour when I heard the first sound. Footsteps moving through snow outside the wall just behind me. Very heavy and slow footsteps. I stopped reading immediately. The footsteps continued past the back wall toward the side of the shelter, crunching softly through the snow. I expected a knock at the door or somebody to call out, but instead, the steps kept circling. One full lap around the shelter, then another. I remember checking my watch because part of me still thought there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe another hiker. Maybe someone lost. Then those footsteps stopped right outside the door. The silence afterward was terrifying. I could hear the stove crackling and my own breathing, but that was all. I stared at the door for about 30 seconds when I heard the faint sound of something near the bottom. Scratching. Slow, raking noises like someone slightly running their fingernails across the wood. And then came the whistling. 3 uneven notes from somewhere outside near the creek. There was a pause after that, followed by the same 3 notes again. I can't explain properly why that sound bothered me so much. It sounded almost human, but lacked the rhythm. I moved to one of the windows, shining my flashlight toward the creek. At first, I didn't see a thing, but then the beam caught movement between the trees. Something pale stepped behind a cedar trunk. It was tall, much taller than a person, thin enough that I could make out the shape of ribs beneath its skin, even through layers of shadow. Its arms looked horrible, hanging nearly to its knees and so thin. What I remember most clearly was how it moved. Not like an animal at all. Animals move naturally, but this thing moved cautiously, as if it knew that I was watching. I backed away from the window right away, and the scratching at the door stopped. A second later, something hit the side of the shelter hard enough to rattle the stove pipe. This was no playful bump, but a full-body impact. It caused dust to drift from the ceiling. The lantern then flickered, and before I could even process what happened, another slam hit the outer wall farther down, followed by quick footsteps, circling the structure at a speed no person should have been able to do, especially in deep snow. The entire shelter groaned under the weight. That was the point where panic really set in for me. I grabbed my hatchet, not sure what I was going to do with it, if that thing out there was really that big. The thing outside stopped moving again. There was more complete silence for a while, until, directly outside the door, I heard a voice speak to me. "Hey." Just one word, coming from what sounded like a man. He sounded calm and close enough that he may have been standing only inches from the door. I dared not reply. After a few seconds, it spoke again. "Can you help me?" There was this emotionless from the voice, like a terrible actor reading a line, not like a person needing help. But then, in that same voice, it said my first name. I've replayed that moment in my head 1,000 times, but there was no explanation for it. I hadn't seen anyone on the trail, so nobody could have seen my gear, which might have had my name to read. No one had followed me from the trailhead. No one I knew was out here. And as my mind was boggled by what I heard, the door handle began to turn, slowly. But the door didn't open. The handle stopped moving. A few seconds later, something leaned gently against the door from the other side, and I could hear it breathing, whatever it was. And that's when the smell hit me, like a metric ton of various rotting creatures and roadkill. I backed into the far corner of the shelter, while that thing outside began dragging its nails slowly down the wood again. After 3 repetitions, there was silence once more. I waited for a minute before I heard the footsteps moving away toward the creek. I stayed awake until dawn, gripping that hatchet so tightly my hand cramped up. Every now and then I'd hear movement somewhere outside in the trees, but never close again. Just distant crunching through snow. One time I heard the whistle return far off in the woods, those same 3 notes. When daylight finally came, I opened the door carefully and stepped outside. Tracks covered the area around the shelter. Deep, barefoot impressions circled the building dozens of times. Some passed directly beneath the windows. Others climbed the snowbank beside the wall where something had clearly reached the roof. Near the creek, I found where it had been standing while watching the shelter. The snow there was compressed so deeply, it almost exposed the frozen dirt underneath. And beside those prints were smaller tracks. Deer tracks. Hundreds of them. All stopping abruptly at the creek's edge, as if an entire group had suddenly turned around all at once. I packed my gear and left immediately. About 2 miles back down the trail, I noticed something that nearly made me throw up from fear. A second line of footprints had appeared beside my own in the snow line near the trees. Bare footprints that were fresh. They moved parallel to my footprints for half a mile, and they appeared to have stopped every moment that I had stopped too. I finally made it to my truck just after noon. I remember locking the doors instantly after getting inside, even though I knew how irrational that might be. I was shaking like a leaf anyway. Before pulling away, I got the overwhelming feeling that whatever followed me out of those woods was watching right now. If you're ever alone somewhere remote and the forest suddenly goes quiet, do not ignore it. Don't try to prove to yourself that you're brave. There are places where your instincts notice things long before your mind does. If you ever hear someone outside at night calling your name from beyond the trees, yet so close to the door at the same time, do not answer. The reason I'm scared of the Tooth Fairy. From Willow Tree. When I was around 8 years old, my older cousin told me a story that I would never forget. This story is the reason why I can't sleep well at night sometimes, or ever look at teeth the same way again. My older cousin Jamie was always into scary stories, and always seemed intrigued when I got scared of those stories. But this story goes. Once there was a girl who was normal at first look, but she was peculiar and weird at times. Her family never knew why. Her only friend ever seemed to be her brother. He was the only one she would ever talk to. But for weeks on end, she wouldn't come out of her room, not even for food. She'd always tell everyone to go away. Her brother was worried and started bringing her food. But soon her food requests would get weird. Raw meat and bones in them. She would finish her food and push the plate back under the door. Her brother was getting scared, and each time he heard her eat, it was like it wasn't her anymore. The sounds sounded like they were coming from her throat. One day, her brother noticed a weird, sickly sweet, pungent stench. He knew that smell from when him and his sister found a rotting animal years back. He knocked on her door, asking if she was okay. The voice that came from behind the door sounded raspy and dry, not like the sister he knew. "Give me more meat," the voice croaked. The brother became scared and ran from the room, but something in his head told him to get the meat. It felt safer than just ignoring it. He came back to the room with the plate of raw chicken meat with bones. He wanted to open the door, but he was afraid. Then he pushed the nerves aside and opened the door. What he saw inside was a sight he would remember for the rest of his life. His sister sat in the corner. It looked like she was taller, as if her bones had grown. The skin on her body stretched on the bones. Her ribcage was almost like it wasn't even on her body anymore. The hair on her head had fallen out in clumps, only patches remained. Her head rotated around, her body unmoving, just her head, like her neck had been broken long ago. Her face was the worst part. Her teeth were gone, eyes bloodshot. Where her teeth used to be were bone fragments, shoved into the gums. Her mouth was covered in dry and fresh blood, and her face was so slim you could basically see her skull. He saw something protruding from her back, but looking at her made him sick. He threw the plate and shut the door and ran to his parents and told them what he saw. They went up, knocking on her door. The voice that came out sounded like his sister, completely normal. She told them everything was fine. His parents told him he'd been watching too many scary movies, but he knew what he saw. He knew that wasn't his sister anymore. He went to bed early, trying not to think about what had just happened, but he woke up in the night. Something was dripping on his face. He wiped at it, and the liquid that was on his hand after was red and sticky. He looked up. He saw the thing that used to be his sister, now on the ceiling, like she was floating. He finally knew what the liquid on his face was. Blood. Her blood. She jumped down from the ceiling. He wanted to scream, to get away, but his body would not react. He suddenly saw something weird around her neck. A necklace made of teeth. She opened his mouth, pulling out his teeth one by one, and he couldn't move, even if he wanted to. When she was finally done plucking out his teeth, she said, "Thank you for the teeth," in a voice that was not hers, the same voice he had heard behind that door earlier. He passed out, and the next morning she was gone, the room empty, door open. But now, there was a pile of teeth that did not seem to be hers, smelling of rotting meat and adorning the walls. The boy had to get fake teeth, but he feared for the rest of his life that she might come back one night. My dad's experience with a Ouija board. From Mr. Steiner. I'd like to share a story that happened to my father. For a bit of background, I've always been into the strange and unexplained, from aliens and cryptids, horror and true crime, to parallel universes and time travel. You name it. My dad, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. He does not believe in anything he can't see with his own eyes. That's part of why this story has always stuck with me. He's not the kind of person to make something like this up, especially not a story like this. My father was born in 1955 in Brazil, of German descent. This incident took place sometime in the early 1970s in Sao Paulo, though he doesn't remember the exact year. He wasn't into drugs, at least that's what he says, and I do believe that part. But according to my aunt, he was a bit of a party guy in the younger days. He was always going out with friends. This story, though, takes place at a friend's house. That weekend, it had been raining heavily. A party they had planned to attend was canceled, so my dad and a few friends decided to just hang out at one of their houses and have a few beers instead. There were 4 of them: my dad, 2 guys, A and B, and a girl. B and the girl were siblings, both of German descent on their father's side. B was a big guy, around 6'2", and about 230 pounds, which will be important later. At some point during the night, the girl asked if they wanted to play with a Ouija board. My dad had never heard of one before, so he didn't know what she was talking about. The others agreed, and B went to grab the Ouija board. They started playing, mostly joking around and not taking it too seriously. But then the girl asked the board if she could contact someone on the other side, and the board responded with yes. For about a minute, nothing happened. Just as my dad was about to speak up and call it all nonsense, everything changed. The light bulbs in the house suddenly exploded. All the windows flew open with such force that some of them shattered. My dad said the cold that rushed in was unbearable, completely unnatural, especially considering it was the middle of a hot Brazilian summer. They were all terrified. Then B and the girl's mother walked into the room. Her expression was a mix of anger and concern. Instead of asking what they had done, she told them to go into the kitchen and wait. Apparently, she knew something about voodoo, what many people in Brazil refer to as black magic. Panicked, they did as they were told. From the kitchen, they could hear her chanting in what sounded like Portuguese and Latin. After a while, everything went quiet. Then came a scream, but it didn't sound entirely like her voice. My dad described it as layered, her voice mixed with something much deeper, much more unsettling. She began speaking rapidly in what they assumed was Latin. At that moment, B rushed in, desperate to help his mother. But as soon as he touched her shoulder, she grabbed him, throwing him clear across the room, out of the living room and into the kitchen. You've got to understand, this was a small woman, barely over 5 feet tall, and B, on the other hand, was a large, strong man. What happened shouldn't have been physically possible. That's when my dad and the others ran. They fled the house into the pouring rain, hearing B's mother screaming and cursing after them in that same unnatural voice. As for what happened afterward, my dad never got the full story. He knows that B's aunt was called in, someone who supposedly knew how to handle situations like this, possibly performing some kind of exorcism or ritual. But beyond that, he isn't sure what became of her. B and his sister never spoke about that night again. They avoided the subject completely, and over time, they all drifted apart. The fourth friend didn't have much to say about it either. As for my dad, he still doesn't believe in most supernatural things. But when it comes to that night, all he says is this: he knows what he saw, and whatever it was not natural. The Dog Man That Mauled My Dog. From Gremlin Studios 78. I'm sending this story because it has been weighing on me for years, and no one I tell believes me, though I've only told mostly family. I've always been an adventurous kid. I would always go out to the woods behind our house and play in the creeks and trees in the woods. I pretty much lived back there. You see, my family owned several acres of land around this family-owned cabin we all called the barn. We only farmed on a bit of the land, but the rest was just there, I guess, for us to explore. By the time I was 11, I knew those woods like the back of my hand, and I'd already gone on several hunting and camping trips with my dad. I'd spent several nights in the woods on my own. I had a passion for animals and wildlife, but I also really enjoyed the unknown and the paranormal, although the cryptid side of the paranormal intrigued me the most. The only cryptids I knew about and obsessed over were Bigfoot and Mothman, which weren't really sighted in my area, although there was a family story about a Bigfoot sighting near the barn when my papa was a kid, though there hasn't been other sightings since that encounter. Anyway, we had a dog named Goose. He was a large German Shepherd mix that could be mistaken for a wolf if you saw him in dark light. Me and him were inseparable. We would go hunting, fishing, and camping together, which was great because we have bears in the area, and Goose could scare them off. He had done that before. When I was 16 years old, my cousins were going on a hunting trip, and I was invited to go, now that I was of age. Me and my cousins met at the barn with our camping and hunting gear. I brought Goose along, and my cousin brought his red-bone coonhound, Banjo. We headed out to the hunting grounds. We found a clearing near the creek and set up our tent. By then the sun had started to go down, and it was getting dark. We tied Banjo and Goose to a stake next to our tent and started a fire to cook our dinner. After dinner, we sat in our tent and talked about random stuff. Somehow, we got on the topic of paranormal creatures. This led to a conversation on the story my papa has of a creature on this land. None of us believed there was a creature out here, but even more so we believed that papa would never lie to us, and this was a story he told in all honesty. My cousin, Audrey, who was the oldest on this trip, started telling the story that we'd heard 100 times, but no one stopped her. When papa was a kid, he was told never to go into the far side of the woods, but no one would tell him why he couldn't go. He ended up agreeing to a dare from one of his older siblings and went into the far side of the woods. He brought a can of bear spray just in case he came across a predator in the dark. Long story short, he got attacked by what he called a dog man, which is a werewolf cryptid that can't shapeshift and just stays in the form of this wolf man beast. My papa ran back to his house, and now this story is the legend of the family. After the story was told, we all were a little shaky because being out in the woods after hearing that story, well, It makes you hear things. We ended up telling bad jokes for another hour to clear the mood, then finally went to bed around 10. At midnight, I awoke to this weird feeling in my chest, like I was being watched. I sat up and looked around the tent at my sleeping cousins, and I looked out the flap and out the mesh window into the surrounding darkness. I couldn't see anything, but I still had the feeling that something was out there, watching. I heard Goose and Banjo shift on the other side of the tent, and Goose started quietly growling. I opened up the flap, telling Goose through the mesh that there was nothing. He and Banjo sat closer to the tent than before. In the morning, we all awoke to dew on the tent, birds chirping in the clearing. I crawled out and stretched, breathing in that cool Colorado air. Luke crawled out of the tent after me, and together we untied Goose and Banjo and took them for a walk. "Yo, last night I felt something, like we were being watched," I told Luke. Goose noticed it too. He was growling when I woke up. Luke was quiet, but then he looked at me and told me he had felt the same thing, and he'd also noticed that both dogs had reacted to something when he woke up. "Yeah, around 3, it was still dark, and I woke up to something. Felt like something was watching us. I heard the dogs growl, but I couldn't hear anything other than that. Except at one point I swear I heard the bushes rustling. But I went back to sleep. I didn't hear or feel anything the rest of the night." We walked down the river, then back up to camp. When we got back, Kayla, Audrey, Sydney, and Seth were up and making breakfast, a mixture of eggs, bacon, and potatoes. We ate, then gathered our guns and hiked out to the ridge, where we would start our hunt. I sat in the bushes with my binoculars scouting the area. I could see scratch marks on trees from bucks rubbing velvet off their antlers. I spotted a herd of elk on the ridge across from us. The herd was made up of at least 7 cow elk and 3 bulls, one of which was a large 12-point bull in the front of the herd. The moment I saw that elk, I knew that would be my target. Luke and Seth saw some bighorn sheep on the opposite side of the ridge and started to head over to that area, bringing Banjo with them. Audrey and Kayla spotted some deer on the other side of the ridge Seth and Luke were hunting on. Me and Sydney went straight down to the ridge towards the elk herd, and Goose was trotting next to me. We set up an elk blind built from large branches and camo tarps we brought with us. I sat in the blind, rifle in hand, looking through the scope at the 12-point bull. That bull was about 200 yards away from the blind and standing in a position that gave me the perfect shot. I fired the rifle at the elk. It staggered and began to run, along with the rest of the herd, but we watched it drop about 10 yards from where I shot it. "Nice shot. Came down real quick," Sydney said, giving me a high five and starting to pack up the blind and heading to the elk. I let Goose run over to the downed elk as we packed up and headed his way. When we found the elk, Goose was growling again, but it was a small and scared growl, one I had never heard from him before. I stopped, and so did Sydney. The hair on the back of my neck began to stand up, and a knot in my stomach formed. The same feeling I got when our house got broken into a year ago. Me and Sydney stood there in silence, rifles up, pointing into the woods. Then, interrupting the silence, a crackle came over my walkie-talkie, and I heard my brother Seth's voice coming through the speaker.
"Chloe, we headed back to camp and we're packing up. Banjo has been freaking out, and Audrey and Kayla have some weird feelings or whatever. We don't think we should stay here any longer."
Me and Sydney looked at each other, then at Goose, then towards the woods that he was staring into and still growling at. "We'll start heading back," I responded to Seth through the walkie, and he said copy that. I whistled for Goose to come over to us, and he trotted over, the hair on his neck standing up, like he was scared. "We have to go. Looks like we gotta leave the elk, I guess," I said, disappointed, walking back through the woods to our camp. Gonna try to come back for it later if I can. We'd only walked about 100 yards before the woods went quiet. Not the kind of quiet where there's a predator in the area, but eerily silent. It felt more like time had just frozen, and I smelled it before I saw it. A tangy, metallic, rotting smell. I covered my nose and mouth with my bandana and tried not to cough. I couldn't attract anything to me and Sydney. Goose growled again, but then it turned into a whimper, like a scared little puppy he was. That's when I saw it. In the trees left of me, a tall, muscular shadow about 7 or 8 feet tall. Its legs were like animal legs bent at the ankle, like it could drop down on all fours and run naturally just like that. Its fur was jet black, its eyes glowing orange. They weren't reflecting anything. They were glowing, I was sure of it. There wasn't much light in the dense forest, nothing that could reflect on that thing's eyes. It was holding on to the closest tree to it with massive raccoon-like hands, with claws like knives on the end of each finger. But its head looked like a wolf's. I've seen wolves before, but this wasn't just a wolf. I reached for my rifle that was slung around my back, and so did Sydney. As I aimed, the wolf thing's lips curled back into a snarling smile, revealing too many yellowing teeth dripping with reddish saliva. The beast let out a guttural growl and stepped forward. It was walking on 2 legs. My hands started shaking, and I aimed my rifle, and so did Sydney. As it drew closer, Goose started growling again. The thing paused and looked away from us, towards the direction of our camp, its nose twitching, making a wet sniffing sound as it sniffed the air, sensing something we could not. It then looked back at us, and slowly got closer. I fired a warning shot to the ground by one of its feet paws, and it took a staggering step back, letting out another growl. It crouched on the ground and rocked back and forth like it was getting ready to pounce. I fired 2 rounds into its shoulder, and it jumped back, letting out an alarmed yelp of pain and staggering slightly back into the trees. Then it howled, this blood-churning scream that echoed through the woods. The thing launched forward again, snarling. Goose jumped in front of us, barking and baring his fangs, and I yelled, "Goose, no!" But he didn't listen. Goose and the beast squared off, both growling at each other. Sydney fired another clean shot at the creature, which yelped, but still fought with Goose. Goose was big and fast enough to dodge all the creature's blows. At the time, I wanted to run. I wanted to get out of there. But I could not bring myself to run away from my dog, my best friend. "Come on, Chloe, we have to go!" Sydney tugged on my arm, but I couldn't pull my eyes away from the fight. Then both of the animals stopped and turned around to face the same direction as the creature looked before. Banjo sprang from the bushes then. He released a type of growl I'd never heard before from him. He lunged at the beast and clamped his jaws on the dogman's neck, and it yowled. Sydney was finally able to pull me out of my trance and drag me through the forest as we ran. Branches whipped at my face and tears formed in my eyes as we ran and burst through the bushes. Eventually, we were able to see our camp. I collapsed in the dirt and sobbed into my hands. I was shaking. Seth sat down next to me and engulfed me in a bear hug. I sobbed into his shoulder, until I finally calmed down enough to walk back to the barn. Luke had called his dad, my uncle, and told him we had a bit of a situation, that we had to leave our camp abruptly, without packing anything up. All 6 of us sat on the porch steps, waiting for my uncle. When he arrived, he and my dad and my Uncle Red asked what happened. Sydney explained her side of the story. So did Audrey and Luke. They told them that we left everything other than our guns at our camp, and Sydney informed them about our encounter, how Goose and Banjo had protected us from a beast. My dad's eyes widened when we told him about the monster. Both of my uncles exchanged glances. They asked us to lead them to camp so we could pack up, and asked me if I wanted to join them, and I told them yes, that I wanted to see if Goose was okay. We loaded up the side-by-side and the ATVs, and we rode to camp, which looked just like we left it. After we packed up all our gear, Sydney and I led the way to where we had the encounter. When we arrived, all the grass and underbrush of where we saw the creature last was now stamped down, like what the hayfields look like after we have a family gathering. The ground was splattered in blood, and there was no sign of that beast at all. But we did find the dogs. Banjo was unrecognizable. His fur was torn and shredded in a bloody mess of fur and mud. and we found Goose next. He was in better shape than Banjo, but still injured badly. His thick coat was covered in blood and scratches, and half his face was gone. He was still breathing, so we wrapped him up in a blanket, and Uncle Red rushed him out of the woods to the vet. When we got back home, we buried Banjo in Luke's backyard. My cousins and I never went back to that spot, or even in those woods again. I still hear those howls of that beast, those eyes burned into my memory. Goose thankfully survived, although he lost the left side of his face and his left eye, along with one of his legs. I don't go out there at night anymore, and even after moving recently to a close neighborhood in the city, I don't like to leave my house without a handgun and my new dogs. To end this, let me just say, if you ever get the feeling you're being watched, and your dog begins to growl at something that you can't see yet, or if the woods go completely and unnaturally silent, get out of there before it's too late for you or the people and the animals you love. The light that brought a feeling with it. From Why Time. I used to live in a small town in Tennessee. Around 2024, when I was about 13 or 14 years old, my family had just sold our home. Because of that, the 6 of us ended up moving into a small shed that had been converted into a house. It wasn't meant for that many people, so space was really tight. My siblings and I all slept together in the living room, while my parents took the only actual bedroom. It always felt a little off living there, not necessarily haunted or anything, just uncomfortable sometimes, like it was a little too quiet at night, especially with the fields stretching out behind the house. One night, I woke up randomly in the middle of the night, feeling really thirsty. I don't remember what time it was, but I know it was deep into the night. Everyone else in the house was still sleeping, and everything was completely silent. I lay there for a minute, listening, but there was nothing. No movement, no talking, not even any outside noises. Eventually I got up, and I walked into the kitchen to get some water. Our back door was a sliding glass door, and you could see straight out into the field behind our house. As I walked into the kitchen, I happened to glance outside, and I noticed a light. At first, I didn't think it was anything crazy. My grandma lived in a camper next to the house, so I thought it was probably her. I thought maybe she couldn't sleep, so she was walking over to grab something. But the more I looked at it, the more it didn't make sense. The light wasn't coming from her camper. It was coming from farther out, from the cow field behind our house. I stopped and just stared at it for a moment. It was moving, for sure, slowly but steadily coming closer. But it didn't look like a flashlight, and it did not move like someone walking. There was no beam or swinging motion, just a steady glow, and the shape of it wasn't right either. It didn't really have a shape. It was just light, kind of shapeless, almost like a glowing presence instead of something physical. As it got closer, I started to feel something that I can't fully explain. At first it was subtle, but then it hit me all at once, a heavy feeling of loneliness and despair. It didn't feel like my own emotions either. It felt like something was being forced onto me, like the air around me had changed. It was overwhelming. I remember standing there, frozen, staring out the glass door at this thing getting closer. But I didn't run, and I didn't call out to anyone. I didn't move. Then it reached the fence, and it didn't stop. It passed right through, like it wasn't even there. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. My heart was racing, but my body would not listen. I was stuck there, watching as it kept coming. It reached the back of the house, and then it went straight through the sliding glass door, entering our home. The feeling got even stronger as it passed by me. It was like being hit with a wave of pure emptiness. What made it even worse was that it didn't react to me at all. It didn't look at me. It didn't slow down. It was like I wasn't even there. It kept on moving, drifting past me into the living room, where my entire family was asleep. For a second, I remember thinking it might do something to them, But it didn't. And it kept going. Never hesitating, never interacting with the thing. It kept going in a straight line. Then it reached the front of the house, and just like before, it passed straight through the front door and disappeared. The moment it was gone, that feeling disappeared too, just like that. I stood there for a long time after it left, trying to understand what I had just seen and what I'd felt. I didn't go back to sleep for some time. I kept thinking about how wrong it all was. I never told anyone about it. In my family, ghost stories and things like that were usually brushed off or ignored, and I didn't think anyone would take me seriously. But I know what I experienced. I've experienced other unexplained things that I might share in the future. So thank you for giving people a place to tell their stories. Well, we basically made it to a full episode, right? Maybe a few minutes short. Thank you all for sticking through this with my nasally sounding voice, I'm sure. This has been Unexplained Encounters, and I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. Send me your scary unexplained stories at darkstories.org, and support my show and unlock extra Unexplained Encounters stories over at eerie.fm. Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Oh, I've got quite the fun story for you today. It builds into one of the most tense and creepy ending sequences I've ever heard in a story on this show. This story is titled, I Met Her in the Rain, and it was sent to me by an anonymous sender. It's about a man who takes care of vacant homes along the coast, but a long rain brings something with it that seeps into his heart and leaves him changed forever. I'm Darkness Prevails, and this is Tales from the Break Room. Get more stories like this without ads and more over at eerie.fm by becoming a premium member. Help us keep our horror alive. Thank you. I took that job because my dad said I would never keep it. That isn't the whole reason, but it's most of it. I was 24 years old. I'd started a 2-year HVAC program at Clark College when I was 20, and I quit 8 weeks in. There was this warehouse job before that, and a tire shop job before that, and my dad kept a running total in his head. He's a diesel mechanic in Vancouver, Washington, 31 years at the same shop. He's never once in his life called in sick. At least, that's what he says. When I told him I was moving out to the coast in May to clean vacation rentals, he said, "Okay, good." Then he said he'd see me in August. He wasn't being mean about it. He was teasing. So I stayed past August. Then I stayed past September. By the next couple months, the summer crew broke up, and Sherry Voss, who owned the outfit I'd been cleaning for, asked if I wanted to move over to off-season maintenance, which was $19 an hour plus mileage instead of $17 and no mileage. I said yes before she finished the sentence. Kilchis Bay is a town of about 600 people on the North Oregon coast. There's a market and a gas station that closes at 7, and a church and a school, as well as a bar I went to twice. I rented a room over a garage from a woman named Gail for $450 a month. The room had its own outside stairs and a hot plate and a bathroom with a shower, but I did have to stand in the shower sideways to fit properly. The job was houses. 9 miles north of the town, there's a development called Sea Ridge that somebody put up in 2006 or 2007. 22 houses on 4 streets, all built by the same outfit off of 3 floor plans. Scattered around the outside of that were the older places, on Cormorant Lane and up Bell Road, houses from the 60s and 70s that people had bought and updated and rented out. Sherry managed 31 of them on a weekly check, and another 12 on a quarterly, and every single one of them sat empty from the second week of October to spring break, except for the odd Thanksgiving or New Year's rental. What I did was keep them from rotting, basically. That's really what it was. A house on the Oregon coast that nobody lives in for 5 months will try to eat itself. So I'd let myself in with the lockbox code, and I'd run every faucet for about 30 seconds, because if the water sitting in the P-traps under the sinks evaporates, then sewer gas comes up through the drain, and it can make the whole house smell like a septic tank by March. I'd flush every toilet for the same reason. I'd check the thermostat was holding at 55. I'd go down on my hands and knees at the crawlspace hatch with a flashlight and look for standing water, and I'd look at the ceilings for stains, as well as empty the dehumidifiers. The dehumidifiers really were the whole job. Sherry had bought a pile of the same model, a white one with a plastic tank in the front that pulls out like a drawer. In a normal winter, you'd empty it every few days. Then I'd fill out a sheet on the clipboard, 1 line per house, and read the whole thing off to Sherry on the phone at the end of the day, so she would have it for her records. As a bonus, Sherry did everything on paper because she was 61 and did not know how to use apps. Manny Ocampo had the older houses, and I had Sea Ridge. Manny was 50-something and quiet. He had a granddaughter he talked about constantly whenever we were near each other. But the guy up and quit on the 19th of December because his daughter in Salem needed some help, and Sherry, I guess, never decided to replace him. So from December on, I had all of it. 31 houses. The 12 quarterly ones just sat in the back of the binder and I never got to them. And Sherry said, "Don't worry about it. Get to them when you get to them." If it had been a normal job, I'd have been home every night. But then the rain really started in January. Rain on the coast in winter isn't news. It can rain from Halloween to damn near Easter, and everybody's used to it. Nobody really brings it up, not in a serious way. What made this one different, though, was that it literally didn't stop. It never let up overnight, and it never gave you an hour in the afternoon to get a load of stuff out to the truck, not without it and your collar getting soaked. It came in one weekend, and it was still coming down 19 days later when I left. By about 3 or 4 days in, the marsh had come up over Highway 101 at the low spot, about 2 miles north of town. At high tide, there was 8 or 10 inches of brown water across both lanes, with cattails standing up in it, so the local government had to put out sawhorses, and the only other route from Kilchis Bay to Sea Ridge was the Ridge Road, which is gravel and climbs up over the ridge in a lot of tight, blind turns. It takes 50 minutes, if you don't meet a log truck. At the same time, my workload roughly tripled. Every crawl space had water in it. Every dehumidifier tank was full, and when they're full, they shut themselves off and do nothing. So if I let a house go too long, I'd come back to a shut-off machine, and mold blooming on the north wall of the master bedroom. Sherry was calling me twice a day by then. The owners were calling her from Phoenix and Boise, wanting to know if their houses were okay. And she'd tell them, "Danny's out there right now." And Danny was out there. So on that day when the marsh flooded, I had an idea, one that kept me from having to drive back. The idea came to me when I was completely exhausted. I finished down at Sea Ridge Drive around 9 at night, and I sat in my truck in the driveway, visualizing that 50-minute drive up gravel in the dark with all that rain. So I just walked back inside the house I'd been working on. I slept on top of the comforter with my jacket over me and my boots by the door. In the morning, I pulled the comforter straight, wiped down the counter, took my trash out with me in the truck. Nobody was the wiser. Then I did it the next night at a different house, and the night after that. Now, don't get the wrong idea. This was a firing level offense. Sherry trusted me with 43 sets of lockbox codes. If an owner had driven up unannounced and found some kid asleep in their bed, that's the company and her insurance and her whole business on the line. I told myself the road was closed, which was mostly true at high tide, and I told myself I was saving the owner's money and mileage, which was also true, but I never told Sherry, or even my dad, that I was doing that. By then, my dad and I were on a schedule of 1 phone call every couple weeks, which was usually about his health or his truck. So nobody on Earth knew what house I was in at any given moment, including me half the time, because those Sea Ridge houses are the same house. The flooring is the same gray plank in every one of them, and the cabinets are the same white, and there's always this framed photo of a sand dollar in the hallway that is, I'm not exaggerating, the same photo 22 times across different houses. The 3 floor plans are the same plan with the stairs on the left or the right, or the garage might be flipped. I'd wake up at 2 in the morning and have to think for a second about which side of the bed the bathroom was on. I started to leave one lamp on, the floor lamp in the front room, whichever house I was in. Coming back at night off the Ridge Road, there's a long, slow bend where you can see the whole development spread out below you, and every window would be black except one. That would be the one I was staying in. It was a nice thing to have. Something about it made the whole arrangement feel less like trespassing and more like coming home. This brings me to the story you've probably been waiting for. So the first thing I couldn't explain happened at the end of the week, 6 days into that rain, on Bell Road. Bell Road was Manny's designation formerly. It's an older house, cedar shakes gone black, built into the hill so the downstairs is half underground. That house was my worst one for water. The dehumidifier down there filled its tank in about 14 hours, and I'd go back there every day. I came in around 3 in the afternoon, soaked through, and I went straight down to the lower level. The machine was running with its green light on and the fan going. When I pulled the tank out, it was empty and dry. For a second, I just stood there. A dry tank on a running machine means somebody had to have emptied it, recently enough that no condensate had come off the coil yet. And in that house on that day, that meant within about half an hour. I put the tank back and went upstairs, checking the front door. It was locked. Same with the sliding door and with the garage side door. Nothing appeared to be out of place. I didn't see any wet footprints, though I hadn't left any either, because I'd taken my boots off at the door, which was a habit of mine. The only thing I found was in the back bedroom. That bed was made up with a quilt, and there was a dent in it. A body-length dent, hip deep, right down in the middle, like when someone lies down on top of a made bed long enough to leave an impression. And when I put my hand on it, the quilt was dry and warm. The rest of that house was so damp the paperbacks on the shelf had gone wavy. I decided Manny had a key. That's what I settled on. Manny lived in Salem now, but maybe he had come back for some reason or another. Or maybe there was a neighbor with a key, or maybe Sherry had somebody else out there and had not told me. I actually texted her that night, asking if anyone else was going into Bell Road. She wrote back,
No, just you. Why?
and I wrote back,
No reason. Thought I saw tire tracks.
that would be the first lie I told about it. And there would be more. I saw the woman the first time the next evening, from the deck of one of these Sea Ridge houses. This particular house sits at the end of the row with nothing between it and the beach, except a strip of shore pine and a public access stair. I'd gone out on the deck to get a signal, because the cell service out there was garbage in the rain, and I was standing under the eave with my phone up. There was a woman down on the sand. She was about 200 yards off, down toward the creek mouth, standing still with the surf coming in behind her. She wore a green rain jacket, and her hair was dark. Even that far away, I could tell she was young, and I remember thinking she was probably pretty, which is a stupid thing to be able to tell at 200 yards. But maybe it was something about the way she stood. I thought, who in God's name is out walking in this? I went back in and did the downstairs. I then came back out about half an hour later. She was still there, in the same spot, standing in the rain facing the water. Her hands were down at her sides. I wasn't scared of her, no reason to be. I was curious, though. I hadn't had a conversation with someone under 50 since Manny left. I thought about going down the access stair, saying something, but I chickened out. It's a mile of empty beach, and a strange guy walking up to you in the rain is not a nice thing to have happen. When I came back out a third time, the woman was gone. 2 nights after that, I saw 2 lamps. I'd gone into town for some pizza. It's a bigger deal than it sounds because the Ridge Road took 50 minutes each way and the pizza place shut at 8. So it was around 9, and I'm coming down the bend with my pizza, where the whole development opens up below you. And at my designated house, the lamp was on where I'd left it. But there's another light on 2 streets over. I sat in my truck at the bottom of the drive with the pizza on the passenger seat, and I looked over at it. It was the upstairs window on the north side. It was one of the houses I'd been at that same morning. I'm not a brave guy, but I was on the hook for these houses. My whole head at the moment was full of very specific and very boring fears. Did I leave a light on? If I'd left a light on, I might have left other things, and Sherry pulls the electric bills. So I drove over and I let myself in. I stood in the entry and yelled hello a couple of times, and I felt stupid doing it. The house was cold, 55 on the dot, and it smelled like those cheap plug-in air fresheners that Sherry buys in bulk. I went up the stairs, and the light was the bedside lamp in the north bedroom, on, with the shade slightly crooked. There was nothing there. The bed was made and the closet was empty except for some hangers. Nobody under it, because I looked. I will say, though, there's a certain feeling you get when you're 24 years old, on your belly, looking under a bed, with a flashlight in your teeth. It harkens back to being a child and asking Dad to look under your bed because the boogeyman is there. I turned off the lamp. I left and ate my pizza, which was now borderline cold. Now, the thing that stuck with me, though, is that I had done my walkthrough of that house at about 10 that morning. I remembered clearly being in that bedroom, because in that floor plan, the north bedroom is where the ceiling stain was that I'd been tracking for Sherry every week, penciling a line at the edge of it and writing the date to see if it was growing. And I remembered turning that lamp off this morning, especially because the switch is one of those little wheels on the cord. I remembered my hands being wet, so I had to try twice. So, who turned it back on? On day 10 of the onslaught of rain, I finished at the house at the end of the beach access. I went out to my truck and there was a girl sitting on the bottom step of the public stair. Her hood was down in the rain, and she was eating an apple of all things. She looked up at me and said, "You're the guy that goes in all these houses." Yep, you got me. I'm the guy," she replied. "I thought you were robbing these places at first. If that was the case, you'd be horrible at it, because you take like an hour." Her name was Nell. She was 26, which she told me before I asked. "Do you live around here?" I said, because nobody really lives around here. "My aunt's place, over on Cormorant." She tipped her head in that direction. "She goes down to Arizona in October and comes back in April. Somebody's got to run the water and get the mail off the porch." "That's basically my job." "Yeah, except I do one house and you do 40. And obviously I don't get paid." She took a bite. "Green Valley, that's where she is. She says there's about 900 Oregon people down there and all they do is play cards." I asked what she did when she wasn't running the water at her aunt's. She said she was still figuring that out. Then she stopped. There was an awkward silence for a couple of seconds, so I felt pressured to say something. I explained to her that I'd started HVAC school at Clark and lasted 8 weeks, and that my dad kept a list of the jobs I had, temporarily. She nodded the whole time I was talking. "I was a dental assistant," she said eventually. "Spokane, for 4 years. I just walked out during one lunch break and never went back." "Oh, so you quit? Quit. She turned the apple around, looking for a good side. "Everybody I know who finished a program hates their life." I laughed a bit harder than the joke was worth. I don't think I'd laughed at all since October. Nell had a chipped front tooth, upper left, a little corner off of it. She caught me looking and tapped it with a fingernail. "Swing set," she said. "I was 9 years old, and I went face first into the chain." We sat at the bottom of the stairs for nearly an hour, with the rain coming down on both of us, neither one of us doing much about it. When I finally said I had 4 more houses, she stood up and brushed off the back of her jeans. "Hey, tomorrow you should tell me which one you'll be at," she said, "so I don't have to sit on a step like a stray dog." I gave her the address that night. 3 days later, I gave her the code. I was in bad shape by then, and I had never noticed it. I'd been alone since October. There was Sherry on the phone about crawl spaces and whatnot. There was a guy named Roy at the market who says about 9 words a day, and 4 of them are, "You want a bag?" A woman named Gail I saw once a month when I paid rent. At this point, I was going a little crazy, starting to talk to myself out loud in the houses as I worked. It wasn't crazy talk, honestly. It was just, okay, upstairs, to nobody, just to have a voice in the room. But then I had a girl show up out of the rain. A girl who thought my job was funny, and that my life was interesting. And I fell for her about as fast as it is possible for a person to fall for someone. Just 4 days at the most is how long it took. On day 4, I was already thinking about spring, where she'd go then, and whether she would stay for me. Those next few days were the best days I'd had out there. She'd come find me at whatever house I'd told her about. Sometimes she'd already be inside when I came back from the truck, sitting sideways in an armchair with her legs over the arm, reading a paperback book she'd taken off a shelf. She read other people's vacation paperbacks the whole time I knew her, but I don't think she finished a single one. She'd get like 60 pages in one and leave it face down and start another one at the next house. She helped me sometimes too. Not with the crawl spaces. She wasn't going down there. But she'd go around and run the faucets while I did the dehumidifier thing. And she was fast at it. One night I came upstairs and she'd already flushed all 3 toilets and set the thermostat back. Then she said, "You're welcome. I've cut 11 minutes off your life." We drove into town twice on the Ridge Road. The second time we got sandwiches at the market. Those turkey ones that Roy's wife makes and wraps in white paper. We sat in my truck in the gravel lot with the wipers going, and we enjoyed them. I noticed something at the time and thought it was funny. We were chewing at the same speed. Exactly the same speed. I would take a bite, she would take a bite, and our jaws were just synced up. And when I swallowed, she swallowed. I noticed it. Then I did it on purpose for a second and slowed way down and chewed like a cow. She slowed down too without ever looking at me. I laughed and said we shared the same brain cell. And she said, "Oh, are you watching my mouth when I eat?" and shoved my shoulder. There were other things I noticed and filed away as nothing at the time. She yawned when I yawned every single time within about a second. Anybody will tell you yawns are contagious, so that one didn't even register as a thing until later. Her hair was always dry. She had a green rain jacket, and the shoulders of it would be dark with water, and there would be droplets on her eyelashes. But the hair on top of her head would be dry as a bone. I assumed her hood had been up. That's what I assumed for those days. She never had a car either. Cormorant Lane to Sea Ridge is about 1.5 miles of shoulderless road with log trucks on it, and she apparently walked it in the dark and in that rain, both directions. When I offered to drive her, she always said she liked walking, so I let it go. Again, a lonely 24-year-old guy I was. A girl was walking 1.5 miles through January storm to sit in a room with me, and that made me feel special. She never told me anything about herself that I hadn't told her first. That aspect I didn't put together for months. Sitting in my dad's basement in Vancouver in the spring, I went back over it. I'd say I dropped out of a program, and she would later tell me she dropped out of something. I said my parents split when I was 12 years old, and a couple days later she said her parents split when she was 11. I said the thing I missed the most was my grandma's house in Ridgefield. I explained how it smelled, and 2 days later she was telling me about her grandma's place in Colville. "Cedar chest," she said, "and coffee that had been sitting on the burner since breakfast." Everything about her, everything she would say was a mirror or a bounce back off of something I'd said. And I never caught it, because at the time I really thought it was just us having a lot in common, like I'd found the perfect woman. The night after the sandwiches was when I gave her the code. It came up naturally. "So, where are you going to be tomorrow?" she asked. 4212. "If I get there first, I stand out in the rain." 4409, I told her. "Oh, is that the code?" I nodded. "That's the code to all of them, isn't it?" I shook my head. "They're all different, actually. That one's just 4409. "Huh," she said, then went back to her book. After that, I gave her one almost every day. I'd say the address and the 4 digits, and she'd repeat them back to me once and never write them down and never got them wrong. Every night I did that, every single night, just handing over access to this woman. Day 14. I was at 4207. It was the house with the ceiling stain and the crooked lamp. I hadn't really wanted to sleep there, but the tank in that house was the second worst on the whole rotation, and I could not justify the drive. Nell had come over around 7 with a bag of the powdered donuts they sell at the gas station. We'd eaten most of them on the living room floor, with our backs against the couch. Around 11, she got up and said she was going to use the bathroom. I heard the door shut down the hall. The upstairs hallway runs 14 feet from the top of the stairs to the master door. I know the number well. I'd put tape on it in October, checking a baseboard gap for Sherry. I went up to get my phone charger. I got to the top of the stairs, and there was a woman standing at the other end. She was beautiful, young, 20-something, with dark hair and clear skin and a green jacket. She was standing there with her hands at her sides, looking at me. And she looked healthy. She looked completely and totally fine. But every single hair on my body stood straight up. I couldn't have told you why in that moment. All I knew was that my legs had gone loose, my mouth had gone dry. My entire body understood something my head was about 2 seconds behind on. Because at 14 feet, you can see a person's pores. You can see whether they blink or not. She was 14 feet away, and she looked like someone standing at the far end of a soccer field, smoothed out and filled in and too even. I said her name. Nell? I began to walk up towards her. I took 4 steps, but somehow, the door at the end, the woman ahead of me, neither of them got closer. The framed sand dollar on the right-hand wall was still on my right, at my shoulder. I should have passed it, but it was still there. I stopped. I remember reaching out and putting my hand flat on the wall because it felt like the floor below me had disappeared. Then she smiled at me. A nice smile. That's when I heard a toilet flush. The bathroom door opened on my left, 4 feet away from me, and Nell came out drying her hands on her jeans, saying, "What are you doing?" And the hallway was 14 feet long again, and there was nobody at the end of it. I told her I had gotten dizzy. She got me a glass of water and made me sit down on the stairs. She sat 2 steps below me with her hand on my knee. "When did you last eat something that wasn't a donut?" I had to actually think about it. "There was a burrito." "When?" "Yesterday." "You've gone white," she said. "Sit there. If the room starts spinning again, put your head down." She was kind about it, so nice to me. She never asked if I'd seen something. But if you find a guy standing in a hallway with his hand flat on the wall saying a name and looking up, you usually ask what he saw. But she asked what I'd eaten. The next afternoon, I was upstairs at 4118, the Ind House, at the big window in the master bedroom that looks out over the pines to the beach. Nell had gone down the access stair to look for glass floats, which she claimed washed up there, and which I'm now certain she'd never once looked for before I mentioned my grandma collected them. She was down on the sand about 150 yards out. She turned around and waved up at the window with both arms over her head, the big wave you do for someone far away. In the glass behind my own reflection, there was a woman standing in the bedroom. It was dark enough outside and bright enough inside that the glass had gone half mirror, with the bedroom laid over the beach. She was about 8 feet back near the closet, and pale. Her face was a gray-green, and the skin of it had come loose around her hairline, so there was a gap there. Her mouth was open, and the jaw hung crooked on one side, lower on the left, and her teeth were long due to the gums pulling back off of them. I turned around so fast, I hit my elbow on the window frame. But when I did, the room was empty. The closet doors were shut, and the carpet still had the vacuum lines on it. What I thought, standing there with my elbow ringing, was, thank God. Because Nell was down on the beach. I'd been looking right at her in the same second that I saw that figure, the figure that had looked like her last time. This time they were in 2 completely different places. So maybe, whatever that gray thing was, it's not her, I thought, and has nothing to do with her. And I could go downstairs and hug her, and everything would be fine. Seeing 2 of them at once means there's 2 of them. Late afternoon on the 16th day, I was at 4133 finishing up. I had stepped out the slider onto the deck to dump a bucket over the rail. The sun was starting to set. The beach was empty except for something down by the creek mouth. I saw a person standing still down there facing the water, 200 yards away, same spot as the very first time I saw it. And I could see her face. I should not have been able to see her face that well from that distance. But just like the staircase incident, distance somehow warped. Because I could tell that the left side of her face had gone, and the socket had collapsed, so that the eye sat lower than the other. I could see the color of her skin, a mix of seafoam green and something pale and gross. Her hair was off her scalp in patches, and the hinge of her jaw was hanging. That was 200 yards, in the rain at sundown. You cannot see a person's eye socket at 200 yards. You can barely see if someone's got a hat on at that distance. So how was I able to see that? And what I saw made me so frightened that I hope I never feel that way again. What my gut told me, despite what my eyes saw, was that this thing was not 200 yards away. It only looked that way, but was much, much closer. I ran back inside and locked the slider, which wouldn't do much if someone really wanted to get inside. I stood in the kitchen and trembled. I went and got my duffel bag, and I threw my stuff in it, ready to leave. I'd sleep in the truck at Gale's. I would tell Sherry the roads were bad. I was just done tonight. Nell was standing in the front room by the lamp. I hadn't heard her come in. She said, "Where are you going with that?" I told her everything. I started with the dry tank at Bell Road, going right through the lamp and the beach and the hallway, standing there with a duffel bag in my hand, like some kid running away from home. She didn't laugh, and she didn't seem scared. She put her hands in her jacket pockets and thought for a second, then said, "How many of these houses are empty right now?" "All of them. 43. 43 houses with nobody in them." She let that sit for a moment. "Do any of them have a busted window? A door that doesn't latch?" "Probably. Bell Road's got a sliding door that sticks." "So, somebody's living out here." I began to say something, but she kept going. "Look, it's January. It's the end of the road, and it's been raining for 2 weeks straight. If there's a woman out here sleeping in one of these houses, what do you think she looks like by now? She'll look bad, rough, exactly as bad as what you're telling me." "But her face was... You saw her at 200 yards. It wasn't fully dark yet, though. Well, it was dusk in a rainstorm." She crouched in front of me, so she was looking up at me. "You've been getting up at 5. You've been doing 11-hour days for multiple weeks. You told me you talk out loud in these houses because it's too quiet in them. Your head is just filling things in, Danny. It's filling them in with the worst things it's got, and that's a completely normal thing for a head to do in your situation." I was wordless. "If you drive that road tonight in this, you're going to put the truck in the ditch on a blind turn. No one's going to find you till Monday." I put the duffel bag down. That's the moment. If there's one moment I'd take back, it's that one. And you'll soon understand why. I'd been sleeping through the rain for 2 weeks. Those Sea Ridge houses have shallow attics and a hard roof, so it was loud in there. And it seemed to get louder when the wind came around. After a couple of days, you stop hearing it. The same as you would stop hearing your refrigerator hum. I woke up at some point in the dark because it was gone. It wasn't quieter, it was just gone. I could hear the blood in my own ears. I lay there and thought the storm had finally broke, and I was actually happy for about 4 seconds. Then I sat up, and I could hear it. It was hammering. It was absolutely coming down out there. I could hear it on the roof over the hallway and on the roof over the far bedroom. I could hear it hitting the deck downstairs and running in the gutter and coming off the downspout onto the gravel. Everywhere, except the room I was in. Over that one room, the roof was silent, and the sound started again right at the doorway. At the time, Nell was asleep beside me on her side, facing away. I got up and went to the doorway and stood with my head in the hall. It was loud out there. I then moved away 8 inches, pulling my head back into the room. It was gone. I did this 3 or 4 times to be sure. I put my ear against the wall, and there was nothing on that side of it. I figured there had to be something up in the attic over that room. Insulation pushed around, or a tarp, or something somebody left up there. I got the flashlight, and I stood on the bed, going over the ceiling looking for the access hatch. There wasn't one in that bedroom. but there was a hatch out in the hallway. I got back in bed because the only other option was to be somewhere else in that house alone. I didn't want to do that. I lay there with my eyes open until it came back. And it did. It came back all at once. I looked at my phone then. It was 4:51 a.m. Nell rolled over about a minute later, placing her arm over me, saying, "You're freezing," with her eyes shut. It was day 17 of that non-stop rain. I did 9 houses. My hands had been wet for so long that the skin on my fingertips had gone soft and white. I ate a gas station burrito for lunch, standing up in some stranger's kitchen. Sherry called and told me an owner in Chandler, Arizona was threatening to pull his house from the program because of a mildew smell, asking if I could put some vinegar on it. I said sure, and I did. Nell met me at 4319 that evening. We lay on the couch and watched about 90 minutes of a movie on my laptop with the sound on low, and I fell asleep with my head on her chest. I could hear her heartbeat. It was slow and steady. I just lay there listening to it before falling asleep, and after a while I noticed something. It was beating exactly along with mine. It wasn't near or roughly mine, but every beat was at the same time as one of mine. I've had my head on somebody's chest before. I've never heard a heartbeat do that. I thought, two people's hearts can't just line up like that. But because I was half asleep and stupid and happy, I tested it and held my breath. If you hold your breath, your heart slows down. When I did that, I felt my heart rate go down a little bit. I held it until my chest hurt. About 50 seconds, I think. And the whole time her heart came down with mine, step for step, beat for beat, until it was going at that low, heavy pace. Then I let go, taking a big breath. My beats and hers came back up at the same time. I lifted my head and looked at her. She was watching the movie with her chin tucked down, and she looked at me, saying, "What?" "Nothing," I said, and I laid my head back down. Something was wrong, and I didn't want it to be real. I woke up in the middle of the night at around 2:30. I wasn't sure what woke me. Nell was on her side facing away from me on the other half of the bed, about 1.5 feet of space between us. There was that little bit of light you get, even in a storm at night. And she was laughing. It was quiet and low, like a little laugh you do when you're remembering something funny. 3 or 4 laughs, then a pause, then 3 or 4 more. It was completely relaxed and completely normal sounding. But it terrified me in that moment. You see, when you laugh, your body moves. Your ribs, shoulders, your back, even a small laugh is noticeable by other people. But as I heard this laugh coming from her body was absolutely still. I was looking at her shoulder against the window, and her back under the blanket, and the sound was coming out of her, I was sure of it. And yet no part of her moved. I did not move, and I tried not to breathe too loudly. This went on for quite some time. I want to say 4 or 5 minutes, but I have no idea truthfully. Eventually it did stop, and she said something then, though I couldn't tell you what it was exactly. It didn't sound like words. After that, there was nothing. I lay there until it got light. Then I got up and did my houses as usual. If you're asking why I didn't run then, it was because I was in love. And when you're in love, you can ignore so many red flags. I had my last night at 4212 Sea Ridge Drive. Nell was inside by the time I got there. Of course she was. She was in the kitchen with the paper bag she'd started at the last house. She'd made tea in one of the mugs from the cabinet, which I would have gotten in trouble for if Sherry found out. We had a nice night. That's what really kills me here. We had a great night. She was funny. She made fun of my clipboard. "So, what happens to you in April?" she asked. "When everyone comes back?" Sherry says there's turnover work, cleaning between rentals. And if there isn't? Then I go home, I guess. She was quiet for a second. I don't want you to go home, she said. At one point, she was standing at the counter. I came up behind her, placing my arms around her. She leaned back into me. It was the most comfortable I'd ever felt in my life. We went to bed around midnight. I fell asleep on my back, and I don't remember having any dreams. When I woke up, I was on my side against her back, with my arm over her, my knees behind her knees. My face was right in the back of her hair, and the room was black except for the little green light on the smoke detector. But there was something wrong. I could feel breath hitting my face. It was slow and warm, coming in a rhythm, right on my cheek and nose, very close. My eyes were open and I was looking at the back of her head from about 3 inches away. How could there be breathing on my face? It wasn't a moment of dawning horror at the time. My brain was extremely calm and extremely slow. I thought about the smoke detector, whether it could be a fan or a vent. I thought about my own breath coming back at me off the pillow, and about the window, whether it was cracked and we didn't realize it. I went through all these explanations, one at a time, lying perfectly still, and every single one of those explanations did not hold up. I could feel that breathing, moving the little hairs by my ear. Her back was against my chest. I could feel her. I could feel her shoulder blade against my sternum, and my arm was over her ribs. And I was beginning to realize that something only a few inches from my face was breathing in and out, with a slight catch on the inhale, like somebody with a cold. I did the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life. I didn't know what else to do in that situation, but I had to know. Anyone would have to know. I didn't decide to do it, my hand just did it. I lifted my hand off her ribs, slowly so as not to wake her, and I reached up, putting my fingers into the hair at the back of her head, and gently, I began to part it. She was smiling at me. There was a face underneath her hair, a face on the back of her head. It was under the hair, about where the base of her skull should be. It was her face, the real one, the one I knew with the chipped corner on her upper left tooth. Her eyes were wide open. They were staring at me. They'd been on me the whole time, waiting for me to part that hair. Only inches away in the dark, wide open, she was smiling so wide that the skin at the corners of her eyes was creased, and the breath came out of her mouth onto mine. My fingers were in her hair on either side, holding it open. Then she spoke. "Hi." I pulled my hand out of her hair quickly, and the hair fell shut over it, becoming just the back of her head again. I went backward off that bed like a bullet, hard enough that I came down on the floor on my tailbone, and I could feel it up in my teeth. Then I kept going, pushing back on my hands and my heels until I was against the wall under the window. There was nowhere else to go. I could hardly get a breath in. I'd never had that happen before. I was pulling at the air and none of it was getting down. Then she sat up. She did it so slowly, no jolt to it, no surprise. She rose up without facing me, and when she was fully upright, she stayed that way for a couple of seconds, her shoulders square and her head straight. Then she went forward on hands and knees on the mattress and started across the bed away from me, toward the far side. I was down on the floor with my back on the wall, so my eyes were about level with the top of the mattress. All I could see of her was her head and the top of her back going across. She never turned around, not for a second of it, and I never saw the front of her. She made it to the far edge, and she went over. That's a drop of about 2 feet onto carpet. A grown person coming down off a bed onto their hands and knees will make a sound, whether they want to or not. But I didn't hear anything at all. I was sitting low enough to see straight under that bed. Those beds sit up off the floor about 8 inches, and there's nothing under them. No drawers, no storage boxes, no bed skirt, just carpet and the 4 legs. Trust me, I've been under those beds in that development with a flashlight, looking for mouse droppings, wet spots, and mold. So I had a clear view of 8 inches of open carpet running the whole way across to the far wall. But nothing came down onto it. No hands, no knees, no falling Nell. I watched her go over that edge, and I never saw her come down. Then, nothing happened for a long time. The only light in that room was the green one on the smoke detector. My eyes were well adjusted to the lack of light, but still heavily depended on the blinks it gave off about every 30 seconds. And I know I sat there through several of those blinks. I then thought about the door. The door was on the same wall I was against, down at the other end, and getting to it meant standing up and crossing the open floor at the foot of the bed. I couldn't do it. I don't know if it was fear, or if it was the idea that getting to that knob meant I would have to turn my back to the far side of that room. I got chills then, just imagining it. I kept looking under the bed instead, over and over, and it was the same emptiness every time. All I knew was where she wasn't. I forced myself up then, because I had to know where she went. I did it slow, keeping my hand on the wall as I went up. My legs were a mess. I made it back to my side of the bed, placing my hand on the footboard, and I stopped. Going around the corner of it meant walking into the strip of floor on her side, and that I still couldn't see into. A few feet of carpet between the bed and the wall, and I'd be standing in it before I could look at it. So I crawled back up onto the bed instead. I put one knee on the mattress, and the whole thing dipped. The frame made a noise, and I stopped. I waited, and nothing happened. I then put another knee on it. I crawled out to about the middle of it on my hands and knees, over the sheet, over the dent where the two of us had been lying 20 minutes before. And the closer I got to her side, the slower I went. I got to the edge. I put one hand down on the mattress right at the seam, and I leaned over her side of the bed, looking at the floor. There was carpet, and there was the leg of the nightstand, and there was no one down there. At that exact moment, I felt breath on the back of my neck. I screamed. I've never made that sound before. Didn't even know I could. I came off that mattress and got myself turned around at the same time. I was expecting to be looking straight at her. But there was nothing on that bed. The sheet was pushed down where the two of us had been, and there was a dent in her pillow. But that was all. I hurried over to the door, backing up to it so I could face the room. I put my back flat against that door. I scoured that room with my eyes. I took my time doing it. I wasn't going into a dark hallway or staying in there any longer without knowing where she went. It's not a big room. I'm not sure how you're imagining it, but it's not a very big room. There's the bed, a dresser with nothing on it, and about 4 feet of open floor down either side. Then there's the closet. That's the whole room. The closet doors were shut. Surely she couldn't be in there. I stood with my back on that door for a minute or two, looking at the closet, scared the doors would fly open and there she would be, gliding towards me. But that didn't happen. All the while I was working up the courage to open the door behind me. But that courage didn't come. Not yet. So I stayed put, standing there, watching every inch of that room that I could. I then reached over sideways, without taking my eyes off of that room. I felt around until I found it. The light switch. I flicked it. The light came on. This wasn't some scary movie where the lights suddenly don't come on. The place had power just fine, and the light came on as it should. There was nothing in the room. Just furniture. Bed, dresser, carpet, 2 closet doors. Everything as it should be. It was so ordinary and empty, and now I could see every bit of it all at once. I put my shoulder blades back on that door, and I got some breath into me at last. I remember thinking in those exact words that I was going to be okay, until 2 hands came over my shoulders from behind me. My back was on that door. My shoulder blades were touching it. I had been standing against it for a couple of minutes by then. There was nothing behind me but a closed door. Those hands came down over the front of my shoulders, onto my chest. They were wet, and it wasn't water. There was something on them with thickness to it. Those hands dragged across my skin, and I could feel my skin going tacky where it touched me. And that smell came at the same time. That smell of what washes up on the beach after a storm and just lies there in a line on the sand for weeks. Then both hands came up off my chest, and the fingers went in my mouth. I didn't have time to do anything about it. They went in past my teeth, and I felt the knuckles on my tongue, and I felt one of them at the back of my throat. It tasted like a crab pot that's been sitting out in the sun. I went forward. I don't know if I jumped or if my legs did it without me. I came down on hands and knees on the carpet in front of the bed, and I began to vomit. But nothing came up. I kept heaving anyway 4 or 5 times, my head hanging down and my hands flat on the floor. I turned around then and looked back at the door. There was nobody there, of course there wasn't, and the door was still shut. I stayed down there heaving and spitting on the carpet, not bringing anything up. At that moment, I wasn't paying any attention at all to where I was in that room. I'd gone forward maybe 6 feet. My back was nearly touching the end of the bed. But then the light started to go. I thought it was the light bulb, that the bulb was going out on me all of a sudden. Darkness came down from the top of my vision, and it was coming down slow and even all the way across. It took me a second to realize. It was hair. Hair came down over my face from right above me, and it kept coming. It went past my eyes and down my chin. She was up on that bed right behind me, leaning out over the top, just over my head. She spoke only one more word, and that word was, "Stay." I practically tackled the door then, barging into it full force before I ever got the knob turned. I put my shoulder into it, and the top corner went in. One of the hinges tore out of the jamb with a sound like a board coming off a pallet. Then it was open. I was in the hallway. I ran down the stairs, missing the last 3, and coming down on my side on the floor at the bottom. I got up. My keys were on the kitchen counter where I'd left them. I ran out the front door after grabbing them, and I got into the truck, driving as fast as I could. Throughout all of this, I was in my underwear. No shoes, no jacket. The entire way up the ridge road, I kept feeling something behind the seat. I wasn't hearing anything, and I never once looked back in the mirror. I don't know what I would have done if I had. It was on the back of my neck and across the top of my shoulders. I'd put my hand back there and feel nothing, but then 30 seconds later it would be there again. I did this the entire way over the ridge, taking those blind turns way too fast in the dark, one hand constantly going behind my own head, over and over. I got to Gale's a little before 6, going up the outside stairs. I put some clothes on, and I did that without turning on a single light. I was in too much of a hurry, too scared. Problem was, my wallet was on the nightstand at 4212, the house I had just run away from. I knew exactly where it was, but I wasn't going back for it. There was about $60 cash in the drawer by the sink at my place, so I took that. I didn't leave Gale a note, and I didn't call Sherry. I drove straight to my dad's, arriving a little after 10 in the morning. He opened the door and looked at me and said, "Okay," and stepped back to let me in. Somebody had to go out to 4212 to fix that door. That's a hinge and probably the jam and probably the whole slab. It would be coming out of Sherry's pocket, or out of the owner's. But I wasn't going back there. I still owe her for the door. Well, that was a first. A love story / work story / ghost story? And I don't know about all of you, but that gave me some serious Obsession vibes. If any of you have not seen that movie yet, go do it. It's freaking creepy, and a fun ride. I never knew a 5-foot woman could be so creepy, till that movie and apparently this story. Good night. Thank you all so much for tuning in to this episode of Tales from the Break Room. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. You can send me your scary work-related stories over at eeriecast.com/submit. And you can support the show by becoming a member over at erie.fm, where you can listen to all our shows without ads if you're a premium member, and unlock hours of bonus stories, podcasts, and audiobooks. Your membership helps us stay afloat, and it's very, very much appreciated. Till next time, everyone, I've got to clock out, but I'll be back again real soon.